Welcome, everyone. This is your friend, the DN What If, here with another exciting fanfiction. Today, we're diving into the story of What If Deku Lost Control of One for All? If you enjoy this video, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more fanfiction content just like this. Now, let's get started with the fanfic. It had only been 2 days since the former number 1 hero died. 2 days since All Might had slipped into that eternal sleep with his heir trying and failing to hold back tears and with his closest friends gathered around to say goodbye. 2 days since they made arrangements for his private funeral at the end of the week. 2 days of Izuku missing meals and working himself to the point of collapse to avoid the grief that came with pausing. 2 days, and yet Izuku was up at midnight looking at paperwork. Shudo hummed, leaning against the doorframe in the kitchen and giving his husband the look. Izuku whipped around to face him, guilt and a bit of what appeared to be soy sauce dripping from his face. Shudo chuckled lightly at the sight of the dumplings sticking out of Izuku's mouth. Izuku said through his food. He swallowed quickly and gave Shudo a sheepish smile. What are you doing up? I should really be asking you that, shouldn't I? Shudo said, quirking his brow before pushing off the wall toward Izuku. Izuku sighed and sat back in his chair, dropping the folder he'd been looking at back onto the pile of scattered papers on the kitchen table. It's this new villain, Izuku confessed. The investigation team isn't getting anywhere, and I know I can't access all of their files since it's a private case, so I don't actually know how far along they are, but from what I've been able to access legally, I figured out a few things and I really just want to help out, but look. The darts that carry the drag always have green feathers. That could be a calling card of their manufacturer, or it could link them to a previous theft of supplies used to make the drag, and we know every dose is engineered for each target specifically, which means each antidote doctors make will only work on one person, but they think they are finding out what exact chemicals are involved so they can use a base medicine and just alter it slightly, but that isn't even the point. The point is that this drag is stronger than Trigger, and if we don't catch it soon, they might make it even stronger and heroes could die. They haven't even looked into the green feathers yet as far as I can tell. It could be what they need to, Izuku trailed off, running his hand over his face tiredly. But unless they request my involvement at this point, there's nothing I can do. Izuku slumped back hard in the dining room chair, the wood creaking underneath him as he sighed. I don't know. I'm just frustrated that I can't do anything. Shudo pressed a kiss into the mess of green hair on Izuku's head. He had been worried about this when he first told Izuku to take time off. This case grabbed Izuku's attention about a week before Izuku went to be with All Might because of how many other pros it was affecting. This case was even part of the reason they had decided to keep All Might's death under wraps for so long. There was bound to be chaos when people realized a hero as influential as All Might had died, even if he hadn't been active for almost a decade. They didn't need any more widespread panic than they already had while dealing with this new mystery drag making perfectly sound heroes go berserk on the battlefield. But Shudo knew that if not this case, Izuku would find another one to latch onto. He couldn't help that he was antsy, it was just who Izuku was, and Shudo wouldn't change him for the world. He just wished Izuku would let himself rest once in a while. You were at work all day still refusing to take time off. And now I find you buried in work and obviously still not sleeping. You shouldn't be alone right now. Shudo said softly, letting his words blur together as he placed another kiss onto Izuku's head. He could feel a bit of tension leave his husband's shoulders. I know. Izuku groaned, but I just can't. All Might dash. Shudo winced at the break in Izuku's voice. All Might is gone. And maybe it would be best for me to take the whole week off of hero work and only do partner missions like you guys all said, but I promised him I would keep fighting and be a great hero for the new world. I just... Shudo knelt at Izuku's side and his heart clenched at the sight of the tears running down Izuku's face. He cupped his husband's face in his hands and wiped the tears gently away. I know, Izuku, Shudo said. We can find other things to do though. You aren't failing him or breaking your promise by taking time to deal with your grief. You are not weaker for needing help. He was more than a mentor, he was a father figure. And we are all going to miss him. But you obviously haven't slept as much as you need to be. Izuku blushed guiltily. So please let yourself rest too, okay? You can't exactly follow through on that promise if you're dead too, can you? Realization of what he just said came a little too late. Shudo's eyes went wide and he essayed in a breath. Izuku burst out laughing and pressed his face into Shudo's neck while Shudo sputtered out apologies. Seriously, he thought, can I be any worse at pep talks? Or talking in general? Okay, I'll come to bed, just let me pack this stuff back up, okay? Izuku said. Shudo nodded and returned to their shared room, waiting only a few minutes before Izuku was once again wrapped up in his arms. The next morning, Shudo woke up without his cuddly green ball of fluff in his arms. After a few moments of investigation, he found the note left on Izuku's bedside table. Back in a few hours, just getting some files from work. Don't worry. Love you. Izuku. Shudo sighed and rolled out of bed. He didn't like the idea of having to get dressed and drive all the way across town to drag his husband back home, but there wasn't anyone else who could do it as efficiently as he could. It had to be done. Izuku knew he should have stayed in bed. And it certainly was tempting, with Shudo's left side on blast and the heavenly soft pillows surrounding them on all sides, but he had work to do. Okay, maybe he didn't have work to do. All his work was being divided out to the sidekicks and other heroes under Shudo's agency, so he really didn't need to pick up any paperwork, but he was sure he could find something to help with. There must be some battle report he had left undone from before, or a small-time villain he could deal with. He honestly felt bad for leaving all his work for everyone else to deal with, even if he was allowed and encouraged to do so. He did a lot in a day, and it probably wasn't the best for his sidekicks to have to deal with, so he owed it to them to help with the extra workload, especially with this crazy drag case. Yeah, that was a good argument. He could use that. He still didn't want to get caught. He'd entered via the balcony connecting to his office and used Black Whip to turn on the glass tint before anyone saw him. Emmy, their amazing secretary and paparazzi wrangler, hadn't even noticed, which was good, since she was mainly the one Izuku was worried about catching him. Emmy was an amazing secretary, and Izuku trusted her with his life, but he was mildly, not so mildly, afraid of her after the last time she'd scolded him. That time it had honestly been justified since Izuku had just gotten severely wounded by a supervillain, but that doesn't matter. The point is, Izuku really didn't mean to get so wrapped up in his work. Really, he didn't. He just had to find something about those feathers. He knew he had worked on a case before with a theft or a mistake or something that mentioned green feathers. He was sure. The issue he was running into was that he had a lot of old case files to sift through, and he kept finding old cases to finish in the process. Okay, he may have been pretty happy for the distraction, but he didn't mean to get invested in the writing of detailed descriptions of fights he'd had months ago. Honestly. So when he looked up at his clock what felt like barely 5 minutes later and saw that it was almost noon, he knew he was in trouble before he even saw the looming figure in his doorway. Shudo, Izuku said, smiling as innocently as he could manage while disapproving heterochromatic eyes bored into him. What are you doing here? Izuku pretended not to notice their sidekicks snickering amusedly behind Shudo as they watched the engagement. I thought we talked about this last night, Izuku. Shudo said, you said you would rest. I know, Izuku sighed, studying the tops of his shoes to avoid the disappointment in his husband's eyes. I know. I promise I didn't mean to get so wrapped up in it, and I didn't even plan to go in today. I just he sighed again. Just come on, Shudo said, turning to leave with the silent command to follow hanging in the air behind them. Izuku chose to listen. As Izuku trailed Shudo out, he shrank under the irritated look Emmy was giving him and shrank even further under the suffocating silence on the elevator ride down. Finally, Izuku couldn't stand the silence anymore. Okay. Seriously, I was just planning on getting a few things and coming right back home. I just lost track of time, is all. I was on my way. Izuku said. He was met with unchanging stony silence. You didn't have to come all this way. I was fine. I am fine. I honestly don't need to take more time off. Honestly, Izuku tried. Shudo raised an eyebrow but remained silent. I'm sorry, Shudo, Izuku said. Shudo sighed and his expression softened. I'm sorry, Izuku repeated, fondant the words were becoming more true as he said them again. He shouldn't have snuck out and gone against regulation at all. He shouldn't have worried Shudo like he had. Shudo slid over to his husband's side and nudged Izuku gently with his elbow until Izuku's head plopped lightly on his shoulder. I know it's hard for you to sit still when you're feeling like this, but you can't do hero work after such a recent traumatic event. That would undermine basic principles of the hero codes you worked so hard to instate, wouldn't it? Izuku nodded against Shudo's shoulder and cursed the common sense Shudo kept using on him. Just 2 weeks, love, Shudo hummed, and I'm with you through it all. He laced his cold fingers through Izuku's and pulled him in closer. Shudo's warm hand wrapped around Izuku's waist, but it still sent a shiver up and down Izuku's spine. I have an idea of how we could spend that time. Shudo breathed into Izuku's ear and Izuku's heart beat faster, but a devilish grin hid his flustered blushing. I think we have the same idea. But you'll need more than 2 weeks off after what I do to you, Sho. Will I? Shudo purred. Izuku pressed a kiss onto Shudo's lips and let him savor the tender feeling for a short moment, before rolling his hips forward into his husband's. He felt Shudo shudder beneath him, his fingers gripping Izuku's waist tighter, and fought back a smile so he wouldn't interrupt their kiss. Izuku pulled back just as suddenly as he'd pressed forward and took a bit of glee from the whiny Shudo gave as their lips parted. Izuku opened his mouth to taunt his husband more, but the words died on his lips when a sharp ding sounded. Both men froze where they were, their moment cut off by the elevator doors sliding open to reveal a massive crowd of paparazzi. Cameras flashed in their faces, capturing the NTMT moment before Izuku or Shudo could gather their wits enough to play it off. Shudo held Izuku's hand tightly in his own, but dropped his hand from Izuku's waist, and Izuku could only hope he had gotten that darned blush off his face. Sometimes he really wished he was able to temperature control his own body like Shudo could. They pushed through the paparazzi as best they could, turning down questions and saying, "No comment," too many times to count. Izuku was used to paparazzi at this point. He was used to the touchy, overly comfortable crowds poking and pushing and yelling, but it was still annoying when someone decided to just grab his arm like a vice. Danger sense flared up painfully, splitting his skull, and Izuku forced himself not to panic. He tried to pull away casually, since it really didn't matter enough to find out who had grabbed him, but when said person held fast, he let himself look. Almost as soon as he turned, whoever it was lost interest and all Izuku saw was their manicured hand disappearing back into the crowd. Red nails. No jewelry. Izuku's brain took stock of those sorts of things any time danger sense was activated, which was very handy in battle and on missions. In casual situations like this, however, it made him uncomfortably on edge. The echoes of danger sense still made his head ache, but Izuku shook off the feeling. It was just some reporter. This was just more reason for him to take time off. Izuku rolled his eyes and followed Shudo out of the masses as the security team finally showed up to start wrangling the feral media. Dezawa-sensei and Mike-sensei had been right to call them vultures. They made their escape and hopped in the car. Shudo insisted on driving, and the idea of more excitement at home made both of them much less upset. About the small ordeal. They were almost home. Izuku could barely contain his excitement. Not with Shudo's warm hand resting on his knee. Izuku sat in the passenger's seat, gazing at the beautiful profile of Shudo's face as they drove, loving his husband more every second. Will it be the usual, then? Shudo asked, his deep, calm, beautiful voice sending electricity across Izuku's skin. We'll only change it if you beg enough. Izuku purred, noting the flash of red on Shudo's face, and the sudden heat from the hand on his leg, before he got his temperature controlled again. It was fun to see Shudo so flustered once in a while. There was something so wonderful about being the only one who got to see such a vulnerable side of Shudo. The only image most people had was the stoic, calmly efficient hero Shudo, and in the case of close friends, the same thing but with some stupid recklessness, probably caused by Izuku's influence in their early developmental years, sprinkled on top. Izuku smiled softly. No one else ever saw the quiet moments in the middle of the night when tears and anger and fear could not be contained any longer. The smile changed to a smirk. No one else saw Shudo blushing and speechless and wanting. No one but Izuku could see that side. He knew Shudo enjoyed these special occasions for a similar reason. Izuku opened his mouth to tease Shudo more, but once again, They were interrupted by the urgent beeping of an incoming call. Izuku pressed the button to answer and Emi's urgent voice filled the car. "You've got a tail. A couple of paparazzi got out in time to follow you out. Take the next exit on the left and follow the tunnel to downtown. You can lose them on the bridge," she instructed. "Got it," Shudo said, following her instructions, but not hanging up. Izuku checked the rearview mirror and spotted one of their sidekicks on a roof behind them, following her gaze to find which cars were the paparazzi. "It's the white sedan and the big gray van," Izuku told Shudo, then turned back to the call screen on the center console. "Make sure to thank Mika for keeping an eye out for us on her patrol. Tell her the new suit looks great." There was a moment of silence as Emi seemed to puzzle out how exactly Izuku had figured out who had tipped them off, before she finally said, "Will do. And that's still creepy, by the way. Just normal hero training. Gotta stay vigilant." Izuku laughed. "Okay, so why weren't you using that normal hero training to spot the paparazzi yourself? Getting preoccupied on the drive or something? Whatever could it be?" Emi said monotonously. Shudo's face went red and he sputtered for a second, not bothering to temperature control in the privacy of their car. Izuku just smiled calmly. "How do you know we didn't notice it? You shouldn't K&K shame people." "Really, Emi?" "You're hilarious, Deku," she said, a smile in her voice. "And I'll ask the guide if security to work on this. They shouldn't have been able to tail you at all. We'll work it out. Anyway, this is the turn." Shudo hummed in acknowledgement and turned into the side alley, heading for the bridge as quickly as they could in the busy downtown area. Izuku glanced in the side mirror. "The gray van is still on us, but I think we lost the white one. Once you get over the bridge, there's a train coming by in 3 minutes. You can get through and let it do the work cutting them off. Then take the south tunnel for the fastest route back to your house." "Thanks, Emi," Izuku said. "Yeah, no problem. I'm sure you two are barely holding it together, so I'd like to get you home as soon as possible." "If you wanted to come, you only had to ask," Izuku snickered. "Oh, shut up. I'm just avoiding more work, which, by the way, I have more of, so if you're good, we can handle it from here." Izuku said, "Thanks again, Emi." "Call me back if you can't lose them," Emi said, and the call ended. Zuku. That was hot. Izuku laughed as the blush spread further over Shudo's cheeks. They managed to throw off their tail at the railroad crossing, just as Emi had said, and the south tunnel brought them out only a few minutes from their house. Shudo held Izuku's thigh tighter and Izuku felt the car accelerate as they both felt anticipation building again. Izuku's unoccupied leg bounced under him and his eyes flitted from Shudo's face, to their approaching house, to the rearview mirror and the gray van that was once again gaining on them. "We didn't lose them, Shudo. Keep driving." "Really?" Shudo huffed, glancing back at the other vehicle with an irritated pout. "Remind me to curse the bloodlines of the reporters at Japan Central Broadcasting later." Izuku chuckled. "Should I call Emi back?" he asked, reaching toward the screen already. "No," Shudo said, taking his warm hand off of Izuku's thigh and using it to pull Izuku's hand back. "I'll lose them myself." With that, Shudo slammed his foot down, and their car rocketed forward. They drove through twisting tunnels, down odd back roads, every tactic they could think of, but they just couldn't lose the van. What finally ended their irritating side quest was the van apparently losing interest. They were just about to make the next turn to drop their tail, when the gray van just turned away. Izuku figured that since the sun was now dipping into the horizon, the paparazzi had cut their losses and given up trying to get a story on two heroes who had nothing better to do than drive away all day. They had a tracker on us. It had to be. Izuku muttered, clenching his fists as Shudo turned to take the next exit heading home. Izuku pressed a few buttons on the center console and Izuku heard the car whir as it looked for foreign devices inside. Once the scan had been complete and all unauthorized devices had been deactivated, not including their phones, which was a long and stressful story they tried not to think about too much, a bit of the tension ebbed out of his shoulders. Shudo's grip on the steering wheel loosened for the first time in the last hour and his face softened as he reached his warm hand back over to cover Izuku's fist. "They're gone now, love. Let's just get home." "I know, they followed us all day trying to find out our address. It's just so So creepy. We were gonna. Izuku trailed off shyly and gave a soft huff, but now it's so late. Shudo glanced at him pityingly and Izuku felt a pang of guilt about getting so worked up when Shudo was the one who'd been driving half the day. And it was Izuku's fault. They were in the city in the first place. They could have been at home all day, wrapped in each other's arms for hours now, but Izuku had messed it up. Shudo was quiet as they made their way down the rapidly dimming road to their house. Since winter hit, the sunset came so early. Finally, as they pulled into the garage, Shudo turned off the car and turned to Izuku with a sly smile. There's still time. As soon as the door shut behind them, they got to work. The car ride had been too painfully long and Izuku couldn't wait any longer. He ripped Shudo's jacket off his shoulders, tossing it aside as he pressed his husband against the wall with a dull thud. Shudo grunted on impact, and Izuku almost broke out of the kiss to apologize, but if Shudo's greedy tongue pulling Izuku back in was any indication, he didn't mind that much. Izuku leaned harder into the kiss, feeling Shudo's body beneath his, trapping the growing bulge in Shudo's pants with his own. Shudo ummed in protest, but Izuku didn't listen. It was too soon. He wasn't going to let this be quick. Shudo's hands, cold and hot and burning and freezing, ran through Izuku's hair. His long, nimble fingers gripped the roots and pulled, and Izuku ummed selfishly at the sensation. Izuku put his own hands to work, if a bit more clumsily, unbuckling the belt around Shudo's waist and tossing it, to side. Izuku grabbed Shudo's collar and tore away from the kiss, pulling Shudo along with him in the direction of their bedroom. Izuku all but threw Shudo onto the bed, taking Shudo's t-shirt off as he did. Enough practice meant he could strip his husband and himself to bare skin in seconds, but where's the fun in that? Izuku savored the beautiful sight of Shudo stretched out on the bed before him, chest rising and falling faster when Izuku's hands traced each groove and muscle down until he hit the waist of his pants. Izuku dropped his sweats so he was left in just his boxer briefs and lifted his own shirt off. He tossed it aside so hard it hit the blinds covering the sliding glass doors with a loud clatter. Shudo flinched at the sound, but Izuku pressed his lips into his husband's bare chest and everything was put right again. Izuku lay on top of Shudo, feeling the quiver of muscles under the half-cold, half-warm skin. It made his heart race. Izuku slid his hands into Shudo's, holding himself up even as he trapped Shudo down and kissed his neck, skin hard enough to bruise. Shudo ummed again and leaned into every touch as Izuku kissed every scar, every spot he knew Shudo hated, because despite what Shudo thought, Izuku was in love with every bit of his husband. He pressed Shudo's chest down with his palms, stopping Shudo's arching spine. Shudo gasped, clawing at the sheets as he looked for relief. Do it, Izuku. Do what, Shudo? Izuku asked between kisses, pressing his hips into Shudo's now fully solid bulge. He kissed Shudo's stomach, feeling the solid muscles underneath tighten as he worked his way down, down, down. Pain shot through his skull and formed starbursts in his vision. Familiar pain, but still quite unpleasant. Danger. Let me out. Shudo panted. Izuku shook his head to silence his intruding quirk. He slid to the floor, not caring about the way it hurt his knees because Shudo was here and Izuku had him alone, and he was not going to mess this up. Ask nicely, Shudo, Izuku said, convincing himself that the dread creeping up his spine was just sweat. And please. Shudo gasped. Izuku gripped the fabric of Shudo's waistband and pulled the pants off with practiced ease. Shudo's back arched and that just wouldn't do. Izuku straddled Shudo's waist and forced his hips down until Shudo was trapped again. Shudo ummed louder now and Izuku took his cue, grinding his hips down harder. Yes, Shudo said. Izuku rolled his hips again and Shudo clawed at the bedsheets, struggling up and farther onto the bed, but Izuku didn't let up, grinding harder into Shudo's briefs. Shudo's arms flew up and grasped at Izuku's arms with wholly unintelligible words in between each broken "dang." Oh, it's gonna be harder than that, Izuku said. He grabbed Shudo's hands and held him down again so he could kiss his neck more. Say it again, Shudo. Please. Shudo gasped and Izuku kept kissing. Shudo was shaking. Izuku smiled. Say it again. Izuku used Black Whip to hold Shudo's hands down and turned his full attention to the barrier between him and the last bit of Shudo he needed. Please. Shudo cried, and Izuku obliged, lifting his hips enough to let Shudo arch his back, and ripping Shudo's boxers off as soon as he could. Shudo fell down on the mattress, gasping and trembling, and Izuku let Black Whip go. He didn't need it now. Izuku knelt over his husband, Afdash. He was so beautiful like this and like every way Izuku knew him. Izuku pressed his lips into the moist skin low on Shudo's torso. Low and lower until he tasted Shudo's pages. He wrapped his tongue around the miming now too. Shudo pressed his hips gently forward and Izuku was harder. He gripped Shudo's hips in his clumsy, crooked fingers and worked his way back up. Shudo whimpered and melted in Izuku's arms. Izuku almost did the same, but the feeling of kissing Shudo was too wonderful to stop now. Another burst of pain and his vision filled with stars. Danger. Izuku's heart beat quickly and cold dread washed over him like a tidal wave. Izuku tuned into the distant sounds in the city, desperately listening for something that could explain this intense danger sense. He hadn't gotten one this bad since All for One. Izuku. Shudo's solemn voice snapped Izuku back to the present. The present where he was on his hands and knees over a very vulnerable Shudo. A blush spread fast over his face. Sorry, Izuku said sheepishly, but shook off the hesitation in favor of getting back to the fun. So what if this was a particularly bad danger sense? He was not on duty. He's not actively a hero until the end of next week, so this was not his jurisdiction. Plus he had been extra anxious all day, so it was probably nothing. Snap out of it. Shall we continue? Izuku left no room for argument, weaving his hand over Shudo's waist and pleasing every spot just enough to get Shudo going without sending him over the edge just yet. After this much time with his husband, Izuku knew exactly which buttons to press. Izuku slid his hands down Shudo's torso and pressed a slow, savoring kiss into his skin. Izuku kept one hand on Shudo's pee-pee, suffocating him and keeping the pleasure incomplete until the exact moment Izuku was building up to. The soft M's escaping Shudo's lips were music to Izuku's ears. His lips brushed the tip and Shudo whimpered, "Danger, danger." A fresh jolt of fear struck Izuku once more. Izuku swayed on his feet. When had he gotten to his feet? It didn't matter when. He was on his feet now and his heart hammered against his ribcage as danger sense echoed in his mind. He couldn't hear anything except the alarm bells blaring in his head, even as he strained to find the cause of said alarm. Anxious energy ran through his limbs and he was suddenly aware that his quirk had activated. Something was very, very wrong if he was having this reaction. He had to move, he had to get out there and help whether he was supposed to or not. Because something was very bad. Very, very, very bad. He had to help. Why wasn't he moving then? Get up, Izuku, now is no time to hesitate. He was breathing hard, but he still hadn't moved from where he was poised by the bed. Okay. Izuku, what's wrong? Shudo's voice brought him crashing back to earth. Wadash, Izuku's head snapped back around to see his husband's worried gaze. What's wrong? Shudo asked again, this time taking Izuku's arms and trying to guide him back down into a sitting position on the bed. Izuku pulled away, his heart hammering again. I'm sorry. I'm sorry, I tried to ignore it, but I can't dash. His voice broke, and he was shaking so much. Danger sense? It's bad. I have to dash. Izuku whirled and rushed to his closet where his hero uniform should have been, but he had left it in the office while he was off duty. Sheet, Izuku cursed, and ran his hands wildly through his hair. He had to focus. What could he do? He didn't need the suit to fight. But he didn't know who he was up against. He couldn't do this. He had to. Izuku, look at me. Shudo commanded, grabbing Izuku's face and making Izuku meet his eyes. Izuku blinked back tears. Breathe with me, love. Shudo said, and Izuku followed the gentle rise and fall of Shudo's exaggerated breaths. Talk through it. It'll be easier if you talk. And my uniform. I don't have it. I don't need it, but what? You don't have your uniform. So what do you need? Think it through, Izuku. Izuku took another shaky breath and pulled away, grabbing his shirt off the ground to go with his briefs. I'm okay. I need to go. I'll be fine in this, Izuku said as he pulled on the shirt. Shudo nodded and pressed a short, understanding kiss to Izuku's cheek. With that quiet goodbye, Izuku darted from the room, barely pausing once he had left the front door before he was shooting skyward. He landed on the ledge of a tall building and looked out over the city. Danger sense still screamed for him to move, but he needed to know where he was going first. Izuku moved as soon as he smelled it, following the smell until he saw the tall pillar of smoke. A fire. But danger sense wouldn't be so wild unless there was a threat. A familiar, or highly dangerous threat. Izuku landed in a bright flash of green light in the middle of the street. Roughly 5 heroes stood around the danger zone. A few new ones he didn't recognize and one more seasoned hero he'd worked with before. He didn't have the mental capacity to remember their names at the moment. Paramedics likewise stood stationary outside the flaming building. Why aren't they doing anything? Izuku thought. The fire was small. They could have had it put out by now, but no one was moving. Deku! One of the younger heroes called when he landed, and waved him over with an awestruck expression. Izuku clenched his fists and approached them, not caring about how he must look despite how they were looking at him. What's the situation? Why aren't you taking action to get civilians out of there? Izuku growled, a little more hostile than he'd intended. The heroes shrunk back from him and Izuku felt a flash of guilt. We've tried, but the villain in there has some sort of force field quirk. We can't get any closer, the older hero said. And there don't seem to be any civilians inside. This building was condemned. Izuku turned his glare to the building. He had to find out the limits of the shield before he could take any action. He channeled a tiny % of full cowling into one of his fingers and gave an experimental flick to the shield. Waves pulsed out across the shield and Izuku could feel them in the ground under him as well. It extends pretty far underground, Izuku thought, so no hope of digging under it in a timely manner. Izuku hummed. He had a few ideas, but he didn't have time to pull out a notebook and theorize, so he jumped back into testing. He fired up a bit more of full cowling and struck the barrier again, his arm bouncing back with the same force of his blow and making him stumble. More waves arced across the barrier and Izuku heard the surprised muttering of the other heroes at his back. It was kinetic energy, he'd wager. But at the same time, the smoke coming off the building was getting through just fine, so either this shield had a bottom line of force required to activate the kinetic backlash, or it was just a one-sided barrier. Izuku took a breath and summoned Smokescreen, letting a little bit of the purple smoke roll off his arm and toward the force field, but the smoke didn't pass through. It was met with a barrier just as solid as the one Izuku had struck. Izuku tapped the field once more before he had his answer. He could break it. Izuku let full cowling fill his body and leapt up to the top of the dome. Izuku pumped his legs to build up Fa gene and let float carry him higher above the dome. Once he was satisfied with the built-up energy, Izuku grit his teeth, shut his eyes against the cold sting of the wind, and fell. His kinetic energy versus the villain's kinetic energy, and Izuku wagered he would come out victorious. He plummeted toward the barrier, Black Whip sharpened to a solid point in front of him. The black energy collided with the dome, points driven in further by Izuku's built-up force. With a deafening shattering sound, the shield collapsed like broken glass, and Izuku landed safely on the roof. Safe for only a moment until something rammed into him and sent him sprawling. Izuku was back on his feet in seconds, blocking the next punch and knocking his assailant back. The man wore mostly gray, with only light armor on his legs and arms. Izuku would make him regret that choice soon. Enough. Izuku darted forward before the man could react, but slammed into another shield. Danger sense went off a second too late. The man landed a punch to one of Izuku's old scars, as if that might hurt him, but Izuku quickly regained his balance and avoided another hit, pushing the man down and grabbing his leg to toss him around. The man grunted and tried to form another shield, but Izuku threw him aside easily. Izuku grabbed the man's collar while he was still reeling and took off toward the other heroes. Danger sense had gotten a little too worked up over such a small threat. He would have to stop for flowers on the way back to make it up to Shudo for freaking out. I wonder what flower shops are open at this time of night anyway, Izuku thought. Start searching for civilians in there. I need someone's cuffs, Izuku ordered as he landed, and the heroes and officers rushed to get to work after offering him a pair of cuffs. A flash of a camera drew Izuku's attention and he scowled. Of course the paparazzi were all over him while he was in nothing but his underwear and a t-shirt. Actually, he realized tiredly it was Shudo's t-shirt, so even worse. Emi was going to kill him once she saw the front page he would no doubt be occupying the next day. Izuku sighed and turned back to the few officers outside the danger zone to give his brief report. Sharp pain lit through his neck and Izuku hissed a curse word as he felt for the cause. His fingers brushed over the feathered base of a dart and he plucked it from his neck. Green feathers. The reports flashed through his mind. Darts with green feathers were used to administer the drag. Each carried a dose specifically engineered for the target. The green feathers they'd brushed off as a separate issue last year when the string of medical heists occurred. They recovered most of the other goods and they caught the thieves. Never the client. It was a trap. His muscles spasmed and Izuku clutched his neck as he fell. One of the officers reached out a hand to help him but Izuku screamed and jumped away. He had to warn them, tell them to get away so they wouldn't get hurt, so he wouldn't hurt them. Erg. Izuku grit his teeth and fought back the toxin. His mind felt fuzzy, and it felt like hornets were swimming through his veins. Every muscle shook and Izuku strained to get his mouth to work, but it was like he was losing control of his body. He was losing control of his body. Run! Izuku managed to growl before the pain was too much. A million colors burst in his vision and Izuku knew nothing more. There you have it, folks. A woman's voice called. Dressed in the same gray the force field villain was, and with a sniper rifle in hand, she glided down to street level, alighting on the top of the armored vehicle the police had locked the other villain inside. This is your proof. She continued, proudly waving at the convulsing figure of the number one hero in front of her. This drag is no laughing matter. Even as we speak, it is taking over your precious symbol of hope, and turning him back to those primal instincts. He puts up a noble fight, but no one can fend off the power of pain. He'll feel nothing but agony while he rips his own comrades apart. The only people immune to his wrath are myself and my team, with the counteracting drag running through our veins. Watch as he kills everything in sight and won't even notice us. Her eyes locked on one of the news cameras and she raised her chin proudly. Villains, consider this a sales pitch. Heroes? Consider this a formal declaration of war. My name is Asuka, and I fight for a greater tomorrow. A tomorrow without heroes. A sick grin spread across her face and she posed cutely for the cameras as they flashed on her and the number one. The younger heroes backed away and pulled police and civilians back, but no one dared to look away. Deku, the oldest of the heroes present, said, and he took a fearful step toward Deku's shaking form. A low and guttural growl sounded from Deku's throat and he slowly, menacingly turned. His eyes were wide, pupils shrunk to pinpoints and mouth twisted into an animalistic snarl. His eyes flitted to each person near him and finally landed on the older hero. Deku! The hero squeaked and Deku lunged. Do not give in, Nana said. But it hurts. Everything hurts so much. I know, young hero, but you must fight it. Do not turn your pain and fear on your fellow heroes, Yuichi said. I'm not afraid. Angry. It hurts. I want to hurt them too. Pain for pain will solve nothing. Do not give in, Izuku, Banjo warned. Do not let anger rule you. Let us lead. You must only follow, the third user said. This too shall pass, the second said. We will guide you this time. Trust us, young Midoriya. A new voice said, the sound striking something so sore, so raw, so painful inside Izuku. More pain. Stop the pain. Good. Yes, just trust us. We will calm the pain, Banjo encouraged. You are doing well, young Midoriya. Let us lead now, that new voice said. Let you lead. No more pain. But it hurt. They have to hurt too. We're losing him, the second said, and that did not stop the pain. They still needed to hurt. Deku lunged forward and the other hero flinched back, but it was not he who Deku was aiming for. The number one flew past him and slammed bodily into Asuka, surprise evident on her face. They crashed from the top of the truck to the ground and Deku released an agonizing scream. He slammed his fist into the woman's head again and again, not caring that she was already unconscious by the second hit. Deku threw her aside and turned his attention to the armored truck. Black Whip exploded from his body, and using only some of the tendrils he'd unleashed, he ripped the wall off of the armored truck and snatched the force shield villain from inside. Izuku threw the man skyward and leapt up after him. Moments later they both crashed to the ground with Izuku's feet drilling the villain into the ground and forming a small crater from the force. The barrier the villain had managed to make shattered under his body and only did so much to protect him from injury. Izuku tossed that villain aside and returned his attention to Asuka, green lightning crackling over his body in a terrifying wreath of pure power like nothing anyone had ever seen. Deku's manic gaze followed Asuka's movements as she blinked wearily awake and tried to get her bearings. Then, with wild tendrils of Black Whip waving and with lightning dancing over his skin, Deku charged once more. Shudo had been worried about Izuku when he left in such a panic, but he'd been worried about his husband before. It always worked out all right. Still, he couldn't help but turn on his hero comm and listen for whatever could have been the source of Izuku's alarm. He scrolled through police channels listening for more than a mugging or attempted theft because nothing like that would have triggered danger sense so badly. While he listened, Shudo put a kettle on the stove, therapy works, and pulled out a couple bags of chamomile for when Izuku got back. That was all he could do. Be here when Izuku got back with whatever Izuku needed to be okay. Maybe not okay, but better. And put on pants. Shudo pulled on his boxers and a button-up, for some semblance of modesty since Izuku took his t-shirt, that he didn't bother buttoning up, too modest, and hopped up onto his counter while he waited for the tea to steep. Occasionally, when Shudo was flipping through his voice channels so quickly, he'd bump into the frequency of a news station or podcast. Oh yeah. Shudo thought ruefully as the Japan Central Broadcasting theme played over the small speaker, "Curse your bloodlines." He may as well find out what poor soul the JCB had decided to harass this time. We bring you now to a live report from the scene of the burning building downtown. Shudo paused, the kettle halfway off the stove as he listened. A fire interesting enough for a live report was probably bad enough to warrant an ice and fire specialist on the scene, such as himself. The tiny smile that had been on Shudo's face quickly faded when he heard the report. We've just gotten confirmation that pro-hero Deku has, in fact, been hit with a dose of the new neurotoxin. It's only been a few minutes, but he's taken down both villains we know were on the scene, and, oh god. He's obviously not in control, and his quirk, we all know its power, but I've never. The reporter was at a loss for words. Shudo heard a familiar voice cry out in nothing but agony, Izuku's voice, and found he was at a loss too. The heroes also on the scene can't seem to get close enough to help Dash. The cold fear that had filled his bones was nothing compared to the rage that boiled his blood next. Shudo didn't hesitate another second, shooting up off the couch and bolting for the door. He snatched his car keys off the hook without slowing and paid no attention to traffic laws as he sped into the city. It was the only way he'd make it in time. In time for what? He didn't know. He just had to save Izuku. After all, Izuku had saved him. Someone stopped him. Someone grabbed his arm and tried to stop him. But he had to kill. He hurt. It hurt. And he had to kill her. She had to feel this pain. Do not give in. Do not become them. Pain for pain yields no benefit, Hikage called. I must show her pain. You do not really want that, Izuku. You are blinded by rage and pain. You have to listen to us, Nana cried. They try to stop me. I will kill them too. No, that voice said roughly. Do not give in to your anger. Let them go. Izuku, let him go. Now. Izuku felt as if he were being torn in two, one part clinging to his pain and anger, paralyzed and incapable of rational thought, the other half shoving its way forcefully to the front of his mind. He was very suddenly, very painfully back in control of his body. Very suddenly he was able to feel everything around him, and very suddenly he could see the sheer terror in the face of the young hero he was currently choking in his grip. He shuddered, muscles spasming as the pain threatened to take over again. He pushed the hero away, far away, and he was drowning again. Let us lead, Yoichi said. It hurts. But I can't hurt them. I must only hurt them. Help will come, young Midoriya. Do not make any rash decisions. Let us lead, the voice, All Might pleaded. No help. Who can help? Who can stop me? I can't hurt them, but they try to stop me. Don't stop me. No one. No one can. I will kill. Kill them. They will help. Let them help you, Izuku, Nana said. Help like you? You try to stop me. You can't stop me. Stop the pain. I can't be stopped. This quirk. This curse. You did this to me. You brought me here. I kill you. We are helping you, Izuku. Trust us. And tried. His voice, their voices were all so calm. They did not know his pain. They lied. You hurt me. You stopped me and it hurts. It hurts. You hurt. It hurts, yes, but help will come. Just let us lead, Yoichi assured him. Izuku could not be consoled. Leave. You brought me here. Leave me alone. Go. Get out. You curse me. Shudo arrived on the scene and his heart finished shattering as soon as he heard the screams. Horrible, guttural screams tore themselves from his husband's throat. Shudo saw a flash of red blood. He realized, as Izuku writhed on the jagged pavement and tore his bare skin open. He didn't seem to realize that, though too busy screaming because, he was in so much pain. Just as the news had said, Izuku had been shot by the new neurotoxin. The number one hero had gone berserk, but somehow Izuku had managed to keep his wits enough to target the villains. Of course Izuku had. None of that mattered as Shudo heard the screams crescendo. At first they seemed unintelligible, just wordless bellows of agony that made Shudo's heart clench, but then he noticed the words beginning to form. Leave. You brought me here. Leave me alone. Go. Get out. You curse me. Leave. Izuku screamed, thrashing his head wildly and yelling at what seemed to be no one. Shudo burst out of the car, not even turning it off, and sprinted toward Izuku. The other heroes, not the one Izuku had hurt, but it was his own demon fault for trying to touch Izuku, blocked his path, holding him back with desperate pleas. Shudo, please. You can't do anything. He'll just kill you. One young hero said, and Shudo felt ice forming on his skin, burning her with the same cold intensity that made up his fury. Let me go or I'll kill you myself, he growled. The heroes all backed away from him, and Shudo rushed forward again, slinging ice in his path so he could get to Izuku faster. Please, just a little faster. Let me go. Leave me. You did this. You hurt me. I kill you. I'll kill them. Leave me. It hurts. Izuku screamed, black whip whirling uncontrollably around him, but some tendrils raked at Izuku's skin as if holding him back. I know it hurts. Izuku, please, listen to me. It's Shudo I'm here. Something snapped in Izuku's agony-filled expression, and the screams intensified. How could they get worse? The rebellious black whip tendrils blasted off of Izuku's arms. Smoke rolled off Izuku's skin in pulsing waves. His eyes stayed clenched shut, but Shudo knew they would be glowing by now. Shudo narrowly avoided the vine of black whip that cracked the concrete beside him. Get away, it hurts, you hurt a sleeve. Izuku screamed. Izuku, it's me. It's Shudo. I won't hurt you. I can help. Izuku just cried out again, striking at Shudo with all his power as Shudo tried to keep ahead. You lie, you cursed me. I will kill you. I will kill them. They kill me, you kill me. Curse me. Izuku raked a hand through the air and Black Whip followed the movement, some tendrils trying in vain to pull Izuku back, the rest forcing Shudo to dodge. Izuku wadash. Shudo's eyes widened as he stared at his husband, hurt and broken and screaming and in so much pain as he tried to kill the world, and suddenly knew exactly who Izuku was screaming at. The past users, Shudo realized, they're stopping him. They're also in control. Shudo slowed down his skating as he passed the other heroes and police. Get the antidote off the villains. I think I can get through to him, but only for a minute. You have to administer it as soon as I call, he ordered. He didn't wait for a reply, his attention suddenly taken up again by avoiding Izuku's next assault. Someone was grabbing his shoulders. He couldn't move. He could only writhe. But he wasn't writhing. He wasn't in his body, because he wasn't in control. So why did it hurt so much? Let them help you, Izuku, Nana pleaded. Let me go. Leave me. You did this. You hurt me. I kill you. I'll kill them. Leave me. It hurts. Tendrils of black whip clung firmly to the skin of Izuku's arms, pulling him back from the two thoroughly abused villains that cowered in front of him. One of them was cowering. The woman, doing her best impression of cowering at least, but with how many injuries she had, she could barely move enough to do that. The man was either unconscious or dead, and just by looking at him, Shudo figured the latter was more likely. He couldn't bring himself to care. Izuku pulled against his own quirk, the dark vines turning against him. He writhed and foamed, and when he managed to rip one arm out, it was quickly restrained again. Shudo leapt into action, freezing Izuku's feet to the ground and reinforcing the black whip with his ice. If the former holders could get through enough to take over his quirk, Shudo could get through too. He grasped Izuku's shoulders and held firmly. Izuku, I'm here. It's me, Shudo tried, but Izuku's trashing only got worse and cracks formed in Shudo's strong ice. Let me go. Leave me. You did this. You hurt me. I kill you. I'll kill them. Leave me. Izuku shrieked with more malice on his face and manic bloodlust in his eyes than Shudo could ever have imagined. Give me the antidote. Now. Shudo yelled over his shoulder, and the paramedics rushed over. Kill. You can't promise me that. Stop lying. You hurt me. No one will help me. No one hurts. Izuku screamed horribly into the night, his face twisted into a murderous snarl, and he began struggling with renewed vigor against his restraints. Finally, the paramedic injected the antidote into Izuku's neck and jumped back, but Shudo stayed where he was. You cursed me with this quirk. I will kill you. Izuku faltered. His eyes became hazy, the anger fading out of his expression and leaving Izuku looking unfocused and ragged. His eyes rolled back in his head and Izuku slumped forward. The vines of black whip dissipated and Shudo broke away his ice to allow Izuku's limp body to fall into his arms. Shudo held onto Izuku's trembling form, petting his hair gently and whispering assurances into his husband's ear so maybe Izuku would hear. Maybe he could hear and know he was safe now. He could sleep. Just a bit longer, my boy, All Might said, his voice watery. Then no more pain. I promise. You can't promise me that. Stop lying. You hurt me. No one will help me. No one hurts. You cursed me with this quirk. I will kill you. Izuku trailed off, and like ice in the heat of summer, everything melted away. I'm here, love. You're okay, Izuku. Sleep. Izuku blinked awake and wished he hadn't almost immediately. It wasn't the worst pain he'd ever experienced, mostly just sore, but he was sore all over. And his throat was on fire too, aside if he had a tattered sail for vocal cords. He was in a hospital with a beeping heart monitor to his left and a few other tubes and wires hooked up to his body. He wasn't sure what happened to get him here, but he wasn't too worried. He'd been in enough hospitals to be comfortable here. Izuku groaned and lifted his hand to rub at his face, but only moved about an inch before a cuff dug into his wrist. Looking down, he found his ankles and the other wrist were all held in place with heavy-duty cork-suppressant cuffs. The 4-drip feeding into his arms certainly felt like suppressant drags now that he thought about it. Maybe not a hospital, Izuku thought. Before he could begin planning his daring escape, a familiar face appeared at the door. Izuku! Shudo called. Relief washed over Shudo's tired expression, and he cried Izuku's bane again. Izuku would be relieved too, except for the fact that Shudo seemed completely fine with this situation. Sho, what's going on? Izuku asked, an edge of panic obvious in his worn voice. He couldn't even pay attention to how much speaking hurt because his desperation was rising fast. Can you get me out of these, please? Shudo looked at the cuffs, then back at Izuku, his face pitying now, and Izuku hated that look. What? Why are you looking at me like that? Stop it. What's going on? Izuku demanded. Shudo shook his head. Izuku! Izuku did not like the sound of that opener. You were shot by a neurotoxin 3 days ago, Shudo explained. Do you remember anything? Izuku blanched. 3 days? That couldn't be true. But Shudo wouldn't lie about this. And a neurotoxin? Was that why he couldn't remember? He could remember. He just had to think for a minute. We were at home. Izuku blushed. In bed, I got a call? No, it was Danger Sense. I got a really bad one, right? Shudo nodded. Izuku was grateful for the freedom to work this out himself. Or at least try. I left and there was. Building? Collapsed? No, on fire. And a shield over it. I broke the shield and then I think I got knocked out, right? You beat one villain, the one with force shield quirk, but he was just bait to get you in position. Then his partner shot you with the neurotoxin. Shudo explained. Izuku furrowed his brow. There were other heroes on the scene. If he'd been under the influence of the neurotoxin, he would have been unstoppable. He could have hurt them. He hurt those heroes and the villains got away and he was locked up because he was a murderer. Had he killed them? He must have. Why else would he be contained like this? He was a horrible hero. He lost control, and if he hadn't been so stupid. Izuku! Shudo cried. Izuku snapped his attention back to his husband and realized he hadn't really been breathing. He sighed in a desperate breath and squeezed Shudo's hands. Shudo gave a comforting squeeze back. You didn't kill anyone. Shudo chuckled. How could he laugh at a time like this? Izuku forced in another breath. Somehow, Shudo continued, you actually managed to fend off the toxin enough to stop yourself from hurting one of the heroes that jumped in to restrain you. You killed one villain and severely injured the other, but she's expected to survive, and after her dramatic monologue on live television, she's probably pretty high-ranking in this group that developed the toxin, so that's a win. And you freaked out a few heroes too, but that's all. You held yourself back with your own quirk. I got there and we got the antidote to you before you managed to break out of Black Whip. Izuku's eyes must be bugging out of his head by now. That couldn't be right. He didn't have that kind of self-control when he was normal, much less under the effects of a crazy criminal drag. It was the former holders, Shudo said, lowering his voice. You were screaming at someone, and you mentioned them giving you the quirk and cursing you with it. Did anyone else hear? Izuku said. If he had just spilled All Might's secret, he may lose it again. No neurotoxin needed. I think everyone's heard by now. Our friends at the JCB made sure of that. I don't know how they happened to be exactly where you were that night without any other news stations, but they were there and I had half a mind to attack them myself for live broadcasting the fight. But that's how I found you in the first place, so I restrained myself. Shudo laughed, obviously not yet noticing the horrified expression on Izuku's face. But no one thinks much of it. You were also screaming about killing everyone and acting like some sort of animal ripping armored vehicles apart, so no one is really concerned that anything you said could be accurate. Izuku sighed. If he had been talking to the former holders that much, he was definitely at full power. He must have been terrifying to look at, and now all of Japan had probably seen that broadcast or some video of the fight. For crying out loud. It had been 3 days already and Izuku had no idea what anyone thought about all this. But how could he save people now if everyone was afraid of him going crazy? He shouldn't have gone to that fight. He put everyone in danger and he was so stupid. Love. Shudo hummed, his voice silky smooth, and held a hand up to Izuku's cheek. I can feel you spiraling. None of this is your fault. Danger Sense was abnormally strong because of your grieving, but you reacted like any good hero would. The villains were the ones that did all of that. It isn't your fault you went through this. Wait, you said you used the antidote on me, but we didn't know about an antidote, so did you get it from the villains? Did you waste the only antidote on me? What about all the other heroes affected by this? They'll have no way to. We didn't use up the antidote, Shudo interrupted, squeezing Izuku's hand. The villains had more than enough to replicate and all the other heroes are in recovery too. We even had enough to give some to the heroes that had already mostly recovered to be safe. Izuku nodded and sniffled. At least that was good news. If he'd been the reason all the other heroes died or had to endure that torture any longer, he'd never forgive himself. So was I at full power? Izuku asked. Curiosity ate away at him and getting answers was a good enough distraction from his worries. Yeah, you were. It was pretty terrifying. You took down the villains like it was child's play, and when you grabbed a hero, well, I bet he's glad you woke up before drag made you do anything else. You had control of Black Whip for a little bit, but you used so much energy, I think that made it easier for the former holders to eventually take over that part and hold you back with it. As Shudo spoke, foggy memories came back to Izuku. He couldn't really remember anything but voices. He could remember the pain. And then voices. Nana was one. She and the others were all talking to him, telling him they could guide him. He was yelling. He had yelled at them. He had blamed them. He told them the quirk was a curse. How could he do something like that? No, Izuku stopped himself. It was the neurotoxin, not me. Like Shudo said. But there was someone else speaking too. A voice he hadn't heard last time he used full power. But he still knew them. It wasn't a new voice, he just couldn't place it. Izuku gasped. All Might, he breathed. What? Shudo pet his head. All Might, Izuku's voice broke and his eyes welled with tears. Never mind, the tears were already running down his face. He was there. He was talking to me. Izuku's eyes widened. I yelled at him too. Oh geez, I yelled at All Might and blamed him. I told him I hated him. Oh my, I told him I was gonna kill him. Oh no. All Might is not going to hate you for how you acted when you were in that state of mind. You told me you were going to kill me, I think. I did? I'm so sorry. Shudo pressed a finger to Izuku's lips to shush him. You shouldn't be sorry. I can't fathom the kind of pain you were in, but I know what happened to you and so did he, so no one will hate you for anything. All of that wasn't you. But it was. Izuku insisted, I hurt a hero. I almost killed 3 people. And I did kill someone. I can't just get away with something like this. Villains or no, that was me. You grabbed one hero, who got too close, mind you, for a few seconds and stopped yourself from hurting him further despite the highly dangerous and illegally and non-consensually administered neurotoxins telling you to kill. You know, the internet has been blowing up about that. You were the only hero who managed to control yourself through that toxin and you even overrid the safety measures the villains told us they set up. The one that survived is the one that shot you and she was scared shitless. Wait, what safety measures? Izuku asked. The villain who shot you had this whole speech about how this was a declaration of war and told all her buyers that she and her partner had another chemical injection in themselves that made them invisible to you when you were feral, but you kind of ignored that bit. Shudo explained with a chuckle. I did. Izuku breathed. Shudo nodded with a low hum. Izuku was quiet for a moment. He still had plenty of unanswered questions, but he could barely believe the answers he had now, much less form the words to ask anything else. Luckily, he didn't have to when a tall, thin woman in a white lab coat appeared at the door, a clipboard tucked under her arm and a practiced smile on her face. Mr. Midoriya. Good to see you awake. Or should I call you Deku? The doctor asked. Izuku's eyes flitted to Shudo, and upon seeing no alarm on his husband's face, he returned the smile to the doctor. Midoriya is fine. Or Deku. Just whichever is easiest. Izuku said, his voice broke when he spoke at normal volume, still sore from the drag, he guessed, though he hadn't heard about that side effect. The doctor didn't seem to notice. Of course. I'm Dr. Kobayashi, I'm one of the doctors in charge of treating neurochemical issues like yours, as well as a specialist in quirk-affecting drags, so I'd like to run a few preliminary tests with you now that you're up, if that's all right. Dr. Kobayashi said, watching him expectantly. She sat on the swiveling chair beside Izuku's bed and flipped to the first page on her clipboard. It should be fine, but, Izuku held up his wrist for emphasis, could you let me out of these, first? I'm not feral anymore. He tried for a laugh but it just came out scratchy and hoarse. Shudo grabbed a glass of water that had been sitting on Izuku's bedside table and held it while Izuku drank. Izuku felt like such a little kid, stumbling over his words and stuttering nervously in front of a doctor again. Having all 4 limbs restrained after waking up from a 3-day coma with enough chronic pain to cripple any normal person kind of set him on edge, though. Yes, I'm sorry about the restraints. It's just a precaution due to your unusual reaction to the neurotoxin. But that is what these tests are for. Until we finish them, I can't take for your restraints or turn off the suppressant drip. For what it was worth, The doctor did look sorry about it, but Izuku didn't enjoy the situation anymore. He nodded begrudgingly. My quirk is called brain scan. It allows me to see the electrical signals occurring in your brain whenever I make eye contact with you, so I can both tell if you are choosing to lie, and tell if your processing functions are healthy in order to determine if the last of the neurotoxin has left your system and clear you to go home. Dr. Kobayashi explained. Izuku suddenly felt very vulnerable and wished to look anywhere but the doctor's eyes. Shudo's cold hand slipped into Izuku's and gave a reassuring squeeze. The temperature made his sore fingers ache more, but he took comfort from it nonetheless. Yeah, that's okay. What did you mean by unusual reaction? Izuku asked anxiously. Dr. Kobayashi's smile became strained. How much of the incident do you remember? She asked. Incident? Izuku's mind latched onto the word, but he forced himself to remain calm. Izuku explained what he had worked out earlier and then what Shudo had filled him in on, and the doctor made a few notes that Izuku only mildly worried about. I kind of have an electricity thing that happens with my quirk, though, so I don't know if that might affect your scan. I have this one friend. Well, you probably know Chargebolt, but he used to overuse his quirk and that would fry his brain because of the excess electricity, so would that affect your quirk? Or do people's quirks not affect the electrical signals in a brain? Izuku. Shudo said, softly enough to not startle him, but loud enough to end the rambling and help Izuku focus. Izuku blushed. Dr. Kobayashi chuckled, and Izuku realized he had been making eye contact for the entire duration of the rant. He blushed harder, but that also made him wonder if Kobayashi had a secondary quirk that made people inclined to maintain eye contact with him, or maybe Kobayashi had trained that skill, and if so, could Izuku avoid it somehow? Avoiding eye contact or forcing its occurrence would be a useful skill to have in the field. Now that he's mumbling, I know he's feeling better. Shudo said, drawing another laugh from Dr. Kobayashi. Izuku pressed his lips together in embarrassment. Yes, I must say I've never seen such rapid brain activity in that area of a brain before. You must have a lot on your mind, huh, Mr. Midoriya? She asked. You would too in this situation, Izuku said shakily. He's always thought like that, it isn't new. Shudo added. The doctor made a note of that and Izuku felt a bolt of anxiety. He wasn't hiding anything. Why was he so nervous? But to answer at least one of your questions, yes, quirks that deal with electricity can affect the way I see electrical signals in the brain, but I've had enough experience that I can usually decipher it. Besides, your quirk is completely shut off right now by the suppressant cuffs and the suppressant drags we've kept in your system since you arrived. I often use similar cuffs on my patients with electrical quirks to make my job simpler, just as long as the patient is comfortable with it. Izuku frowned. He knew he had 4 separate suppressant cuffs and the drags, but twice that amount hadn't been enough to fully mute his power in the past, so if he hadn't gotten a direct antidote to the neurotoxin, Izuku doubted these measures would have done much. Izuku shifted, not sure how to phrase it without sounding rude to the doctor or the hospital. Oh, these cuffs would do nothing against Izuku's full power. Shudo said before Izuku could fret long. Excuse me? Dr. Kobayashi asked, looking genuinely surprised to hear that. What he means is, Izuku said softly, my quirk at full capacity, which I don't reach all that often, is basically immune to quirk suppressants. Like, I have had illegal amounts of suppressant drags and cuffs on me before, and I was in a desperate enough situation that I could still use my quirk to escape. So I understand keeping these on now just in case, but I haven't been able to test how much underlying activity my quirk has when suppressed, so know that your quirk may still be affected by mine even with the cuffs. Dr. Kobayashi looked surprised for another second before making another note. Once we conclude the most urgent tests, I don't know if it would be possible for you to show me. I don't want to make incorrect conclusions based on bad data, so I need to verify that. This just seems a little presumptuous. The suppressants kept you contained under the toxin's influence. That drag pushed your quirk to maximum capacity, yes. Yes, but I also received a direct antidote to the toxin before you put on the cuffs and I had help reining it in. The suppressants just sped up the quirk shutdown process, I think. I'm not an expert, But I do know that my quirk is sometimes annoying and breaks a lot of rules, and I don't want you to have bad date either. So just, yeah. Izuku finished lamely. I see. Dr. Kobayashi looked skeptical, but she accepted Shudo and Izuku's adamancy for now at least, and they got into the first tests. Most of them were just basic questions to check Izuku's sanity, while others were more specific to the situation. Do you want to kill Shudo right now? No. Have you ever intended to kill Shudo? Not that I can recall. Do you hear voices? That question made Izuku pause for a moment. That wasn't so straightforward. But how could he explain that? No, the voices in his head weren't dangerous ramblings in the midnight of a crazy person, but actually ghostly apparition of previous holders of Izuku's received quirk. Maybe he was crazy. No, Izuku lied, deciding he could explain in depth later if she noticed, but by telling the truth he would only mess up her data more. Dr. Kobayashi hesitated as she studied his brain, making a short note with a slightly concerned look on her face. Finally, they reached a suitable stopping point and Dr. Kobayashi removed one of the cuffs from the bed frame so Izuku could sit up for his demonstration. Now, I'm only doing this because you two both seem very comfortable with Mr. Midoriya's control at this time. What I saw in your brain map was a very overactive quirk cortex with a lot of strange electrical signals I haven't seen much of or even any of before. It wasn't as overactive as it looked when you arrived with the toxin still in your system, so I'm beginning to think your quirk may just be that much more hyperactive than others. I won't know for sure until I see you in action, but you have to promise me that if you become uncomfortable or feel your control is not stable at any time, shut off your quirk and tell me immediately, all right. Izuku agreed to her terms and lifted his free arm. He concentrated as much energy as he could into that area. Before he could finish, Dr. Kobayashi stopped him. Wait. She stood and hurried to the door as she spoke. I have to get a colleague of mine to see this. I'll be right back. She returned only a few minutes later with a doctor Izuku recognized as one of the quirk therapists he'd met with a couple years ago at Jiku Hospital when he'd instated the mandatory yearly quirk checkups for all heroes. She also recognized him. Deku, how are you? Izuku almost said, fine, but everyone in the room would know that was a lie, so he went with the more appropriate choice. Could be better. How are you, Dr. Umi? Well, now I'm downright curious what this is all about, Dr. Umi replied. Dr. Kobayashi filled Dr. Umi in on the situation and seemed very surprised how unsurprised Dr. Umi was about the information, and when everyone was finally settled, Izuku raised his arm again. He channeled his energy, only about 50% power to get through the suppressants but avoid accidentally shattering his arm in his current state, and formed one small, concentrated tendril of black whip. He shifted and warped the dark energy in the air for a few moments while the two doctors looked on in shock before letting it dissipate. Dr. Kobayashi was the first to speak. That shouldn't be possible? Agreed. Shudo said. Izuku blushed again. Mr. Deku? Dr. Umi said quietly, her eyes still stuck on where the black whip had just been. With all due respect, she grinned, I am very glad I am not your quirk therapist. I wouldn't know what to do with all this. Izuku laughed, more blush creeping up his neck. I get it. Even I find my quirk hard to wrap my head around sometimes. No, but at the same time, Dr. Umi crossed her arms and stared at him in wonder, I really want to study it more. I couldn't offer any sort of advice, but I am disturbingly curious how the hell that's possible. She finally shook herself out of her partial trance and turned to Dr. Kobayashi. I think I'm gonna go back to my work before I start spiraling into trying to figure all that out. I'm pretty sure I was just here as a witness. Do you still need me? Dr. Umi asked. Dr. Kobayashi shook her head distractedly and Umi excused herself with a final farewell to Deku. The remaining doctor stood, one arm crossed over her torso and the other hand pressed into her mouth thoughtfully. Izuku and Shudo let her process it in her own time. That might explain what I saw during your testing. Dr. Kobayashi said. And what might that be? Shudo asked, taking Izuku's hand protectively. There were these random, unexplainable little electrical surges all over. I only ever see them in patients with, well, the one patient with a very volatile electricity quirk, but not like that. That had the pattern of Like you? Well, Dr. Kobayashi laughed hollowly. It was like there was another person in there. Another brain map underneath yours. Maybe multiple. Not whole maps, just flashes of parts of them, but it couldn't have been that, so perhaps it was just some sort of glitch with my quirk because of how many signals there are coming off of your quirk cortex at a time. Or the anxiety signals. But that's normal. Izuku waved a hand dismissively. Excuse me? Dr. Kobayashi stared. My quirk kind of does have other people in it, in a way, so I'm not surprised by that. It's nothing to worry about, Izuku said, the exhaustion creeping into his muscles making him less anxious. I am curious what you mean by anxiety signals. Dr. Kobayashi blinked a couple times before she replied. Back up. What do you mean? There's multiple people in your quirk? Is that why you lied about hearing voices? Izuku paused. Dr. Kobayashi was a specialist and she seemed to be fairly good at her trade. Izuku had been hoping to look into his quirk and its true function and prowess for some time, but there were so many roadblocks. When he'd graduated and begun hero work, he'd only worked for a few years before he'd fought all for one and been catapulted from still the top 10 to the #1 hero and the symbol of hope and started his and Shudo's joint agency. He'd been thrilled to be even more able to help fix their honestly broken society with reforms and movements, and he'd made so much progress in the past years with all of his friends helping, even taking a trip to America just as All Might had, that he'd barely noticed the time flying by. This incident, though, showed him where he'd fallen short. He knew next to nothing about his own quirk. The past holders only knew what they had needed to know to defeat All for One, so now that all of that was done, Izuku was left struggling to manage the built-up power. He didn't need a successor, and if he did he wouldn't be able to have one, most likely, since the next power level would just tear them apart. But Izuku was still active now, and he couldn't go on knowing so little about his own power. He had the excuse of missing a childhood's worth of practice time, but he'd gone almost double that time with the quirk now, so the defense wasn't holding up well. More people knew about his quirk now than he'd ever expected, since he'd told Shudo first, during their 3rd year, than the rest of Class A, as Bakugo had put it. TNG finally. I'm tired of keeping your shitty secrets. And his mom, Aizawa-sensei, Mike-sensei, Mirio-senpai and the other former Big Three, and Emi for business purposes. Plus, several of his friends and allies outside that for the missions to take down the League. All of them he trusted with his life. And while he still intended to keep the truth limited to those chosen people, Izuku was beginning to think he needed to expand the circle again. He needed a professional to help him learn and grow more so he could be the symbol of hope he was meant to be. Now it was as if fate was shoving the answer in his face. Izuku glanced at Shudo, who just calmly gazed back with a comforting look that seemed to say, "Whatever you want to do, I'll go along with it." My quirk is really weird, Izuku started. I believe we've covered that, yes, Dr. Kobayashi said, tensely. Izuku glanced at Shudo, then at the door. Shudo understood the request and quickly shut the door for privacy. Izuku breathed a little easier. And I'd like to learn more about it, he said, because I don't want to endanger anyone by not taking the proper precautions and knowing the right ways to manage it. You are a specialist in the way quirks work under outside influences, and if I'm right, you also know a lot about working with quirks that don't work the normal ways. Dr. Kobayashi nodded, hanging on to Izuku's words with palpable tension. If I tell you more, you have to swear to secrecy. I can have our secretary fax you the paperwork as soon as you agree, and you cannot tell a soul unless I give you my express permission. If you don't want to be a part of that, because knowing this is dangerous, even though the main danger is already gone, I understand, and we can just move on with our lives and finish up the basic tests so you don't have to worry. But if you are willing, I'd like you to help me better understand my quirk. Dr. Kobayashi considered his words for a long moment, biting her lip as her eyes flicked from Izuku's eyes, to Shudo's stoic expression, to the door, and to her clipboard on the bedside table. I think I'd like to be a part of this. I'd like to help you with your quirk. It's already stunned me in more ways than one today, she admitted, so I'd like to learn more. I will keep your secret and I'll sign the paperwork, but will you please explain to me what you are talking about? Izuku began the story from the very beginning, the same way All Might had told it back in 1st year. At the dawn of quirks, There were two brothers. An hour later, Izuku had explained his quirk and answered as many of Dr. Kobayashi's questions as he could, and answered the majority with some variation of, "I don't know." A few short tests on top of that, and Izuku had been cleared to go home, with a strict doctor's note to stay off active duty and be a lazy slob for a minimum of 2 weeks. They set a date for him to come back for a checkup a week later, and were instructed to return urgently if anything abnormal happened before then. They also set a bi-weekly date for Izuku to come in and meet with the doctor for quirk testing purposes, both of them growing more eager and more curious and more maniacal in their planning. Once Dr. Kobayashi had unchained Izuku from the bed and vacated the room, Izuku got up and started pulling on the clothes Shudo brought from home. Thankfully, they were his own this time, while Shudo perched on the edge of the bed. "You know," Shudo said, "I'm glad you're opening up to more people about your quirk." "Why?" Izuku asked. "I think it's healthy." Shudo explained, "I always thought it was too much pressure on you to keep the truth about such a big part of you secret from everyone you cared about and knew. And I know you've told a lot of people since then, but I'm still proud of you for looking for someone outside your social circle to help you out. You can't analyze your own quirk as well as you can the rest of the world's." Izuku hummed thoughtfully and tugged on the sun-warm hoodie Shudo had left on the windowsill. "I didn't exactly seek her out." Izuku shrugged and approached Shudo, wrapping his arms around Shudo's shoulders and standing between his legs in a loose hug. "She kind of got shoved in my face by a new traumatic event, and I just happened to be tired enough to not overthink telling her." "Gotta love the fresh trauma," Shudo said as he held Izuku's waist, and Izuku snorted a laugh. "Seems I was overdue," Izuku tried to say, but his voice was still painfully hoarse, and broke halfway through his sentence. "Gosh," Izuku said, "I'd never heard that a side effect of the toxin was a sore throat. I wonder how that works? I know since it's injected into the bloodstream, it could cause inflammation, but it seems weird how much it did to my throat." "That's not a side effect of the toxin, Izuku," Shudo interrupted. Izuku ped his head for clarification. "Your throat is sore because of how much you were screaming." Izuku saw the dark look that came over Shudo's face and his stomach dropped. "Screaming? Like the killing thing?" Izuku whispered. "Not until the end," Shudo said, looking down as if the thought pained him. "Before the threats, you were in so much pain, Izuku. You were in so much pain and you were crying and screaming. I was so worried about you. I've never heard you." Shudo's hands clenched tightly and he clung to Izuku's clothing like Izuku would float away without his hold. "I remember pain," Izuku said softly, little snippets of the things the other holders said, "and I remember pain, but I wasn't really conscious for most of it. I may have been on my feet, but it was like my brain took a back seat outside of my body and out of the pain and didn't even watch most of the action. I'm a lot more okay than I feel I should be, if that makes sense." Shudo nodded and gazed at Izuku with a slight relief in his voice as he said, "I'm glad. I never want you to have to feel that kind of pain again." Shudo pressed his forehead to Izuku's and Izuku relished the tickle of his husband's hair on his face. "Oh, I almost forgot." Shudo suddenly stood and walked around the bed, producing a bouquet of flowers that had been out of sight behind the bedside table until then. "I got you flowers." Shudo presented the bouquet to Izuku and Izuku felt fresh tears well up in his eyes. He crashed into Shudo in a hug, not even taking the flowers. Shudo laughed lightly and petted Izuku's hair comfortingly. "What is it now, love?" he cooed. Izuku sniffled and pulled back enough to see Shudo's face. "I was gonna buy you flowers on the way home from the fight to apologize for leaving," Izuku sobbed. Shudo badly hit another laugh and pulled Izuku back into the embrace. Izuku and Shudo gathered their few things and checked out before heading downstairs to where Shudo had called an agency car. Both of them had been wiped out in the past few days, from villains and neurotoxins and quirk overload and borderline possession, and in Shudo's case, from barely sleeping the entire time Izuku had been unconscious. Needless to say, neither of them trusted themselves or each other to safely drive them home. They didn't get to the car that easily. As soon as the hospital doors slid open, they were swarmed with the press. Cameras flashed and the mob screamed for their attention from every direction. Izuku flinched back at the noise, a weak danger sense signal bubbling up through the leftover quirk suppressant drags in his system. Shudo. Shudo. Do you feel unsafe after the threats Deku issued to you? Deku. Are you returning to hero work? Is it safe to return to work? What stops you from going berserk again? Where have you been for 2 weeks? Deku. Deku, over here. Over here. What can you tell us about the villains? Will Deku face criminal charges for excessive force in battle? Are we? Shut the F up. The crowd of paparazzi suddenly went silent and whirled around, shocked by the harsh cry from behind them. Izuku heaved a relieved sigh at the quiet and gave a grateful look to pro-hero Dynamite as his friend and Shudo cleared a path to the car. F off you FING sickos. Don't know how you even fucking found him, Kaken growled, waving Izuku and Shudo on. As they loaded into the car, a few brave people of the press tried to ask more questions, but just a look from Bakugo was enough to shut them up quickly. The driver made a few evasive moves to lose any paparazzi that might have followed them, but Izuku doubted even the persistent souls at JCB would have the courage to upset Dynamite. Well, that was effing annoying, Kaken said, but other than that, are you doing fine? I'm alright. Just a little sore and tired still, and I have some bad scrapes, but I have 2 weeks to recover. I'm Dash. That's not what I mean and you know it, Kaken interrupted, staring Izuku down with a look only Bakugo had ever managed to make so knowing and hostile at the same time. Izuku looked down and picked at the bandage on his arm from the fore. I'm managing. Shudo elbowed Izuku gently and Izuku shot his a look of betrayal. You're obviously not because you're still working and getting F'd up on missions like that, Bakugo said. Hey, Izuku defended, that was the first time that happened, and I've been staying out of the office as much as I can, but then danger sense went haywire and I had to help. It was a mistake and it won't happen again, but it isn't like I planned that. Yeah, sure, Bakugo scoffed, then his expression became more serious. You don't have to pretend like you're fine. We all know how close you were with him. No one expects, Bakugo paused to correct himself, well, we don't expect you to be fine after this. But the public does, Izuku murmured. He jumped back in before Shudo or Bakugo could contest that. They do. I'm the symbol of hope, yet I've been out for 2 weeks and as soon as I come back, I go berserk on national television and hurt another pro-hero, then wind up in the hospital. I'm not saying I'm gonna ignore the new 2-week rest order this time, because I know I'm gonna need it, but I also don't want you guys acting like I'm messed up or something. You mean messed up? We're all messed up after this. It was our teacher, and for most of us, an idol, and you think we aren't all messed the F up? Basically all of us took at least a few days off to deal, and we weren't even there when he died. You watched that sheet and got all that last words bullshit because you cared even more about him than we did, so I can safely say that you're more messed up than us and I don't want you to pull that sheet like in high school where you act like nothing's wrong. I'm not. I'm taking the 2 weeks, for weeks now, and I'm seeing a quirk specialist and I'm not gonna work again unless All for One himself shows up, so what more do you want? Izuku cried, his pulse racing in his ears as his breathing picked up speed. Izuku, Shudo said gently, placing his cold hand on Izuku's shoulder to stabilize him. Izuku took a shaky breath and stopped himself from releasing any more unwarranted aggression. It was his own stress from recent events and he had no reason to take his issues out on others. Even though a part of him really wanted to have some childlike tantrum, he knew it wouldn't help. I'm sorry, Izuku said, leveling his tone as he leaned back into his seat again. I shouldn't have yelled. I'm just tired and I'd like to go home without anything else to worry about. Thank you for your help and your concern, but I'm fine. I'll be fine. Right? Bakugo said, but didn't push the argument any further. The rest of the drive passed in silence. Izuku and Shudo were dropped off at their house and Bakugo chucked the flowers out after them with a harsh, "Get effing well, nerd," when they forgot them. Izuku wanted to crash on top of the bed as soon as he saw it. Heck, he would have taken the couch at this point. But the clinical smell of the hospital combined with the natural odors he'd been too unconscious to wash off for 3 days was too strong to ignore. He quickly showered and changed into more comfortable clothes that Shudo laid out for him and then curled up on the bed. His plan was to wait for Shudo to finish his shower so they could turn on a show that they would not watch any of as they fell asleep together, But his body had other plans. His eyelids became nigh on impossible to hold open, and if he'd been asked to stand up or move a single one of his limbs, he would have laughed out loud. Except he was too tired to even laugh, so he'd likely just wheezed tiredly. Despite the sun being high in the sky at not even noon, Izuku was asleep in seconds. Izuku woke up slowly and it took a few moments to register his surroundings. He knew he was in his bedroom, but he had to remember the events of the past few days in order to understand why his body was as painful to inhabit as it was. 2 weeks. Funeral. Open case. Building collapse. Gray clothing. Green feathers. Neurotoxins. Hospital. His throat hurt. Dr. Kobayashi. More pain. Screaming. So much pain. Oh yeah, Izuku thought, feeling the intense throb of his chronic pain flaring up, that'll do it. Izuku had been dealing with chronic pain for much of his hero career. He never liked to, but he'd even gotten used to taking days off when he had particularly bad flare-ups. He kept his specialty painkillers by his bed, because if Shudo was gone, as he was now, and Izuku was in bed during a flare-up, he was not going to make it to the medicine cabinet to get his pills without blacking out or giving up, usually the former. It was still a struggle to get the bottle where it was now, but Izuku much preferred this to that. Izuku pushed himself up onto one elbow with a series of pained grunts and reached the pill bottle with his other hand. Izuku's mouth was dry and his throat burned even more than it had at the hospital, so he was very happy to see the water glass on the bedside table as well. Izuku fumbled with the bottle cap. He'd moved the pills to a non-childproof bottle since his fingers were much the target of his chronic pain and would therefore prevent him from getting the bottle open, but eventually managed to get a pill out. He'd have to order more of his pills soon. He'd put it off after All Might's death since he was supposed to be at home instead of out triggering flare-ups for 2 weeks. Guess I was due, Izuku thought bitterly, knocking his head back to swallow the pill as he sipped the water. The movement made his spine cry out and his neck gave an unsettling pop, so Izuku figured he should do a few stretches. Izuku had done yoga since middle school, needing some way to pass the time other than his hero notes and first aid, and had kept up with it since then, even getting to use his flexibility a lot for hero work. He had found a few yoga positions that managed to dull some of the pain his old injuries caused him, but on such a bad flare-up, he would be lucky to get into a Sukhasana pose. Izuku slowly, and with much pained groaning, sat up in bed, blinking blearily in the morning sunlight coming through the glass doors to his side. He was made aware he was shirtless when the blanket slipped off his shoulders and let a sting of comparatively cold air touch his skin. Izuku shivered and another bolt of pain ran through each old ache. Izuku stayed very still and held his breath until the pain subsided enough to think again. He still felt a throb of scars, sore muscles, and past broken bones in a painful mix of what felt like hot and cold electricity. Izuku continued to slowly stretch and massage the reachable aches with his less painfully damaged hand. Hopefully he would be able to breathe comfortably soon. The bedroom door was open and Izuku could hear something sizzling as Shudo cooked. Izuku would have preferred Shudo to keep him warm in bed, but an aggressive growl from his stomach helped him get over it quickly. Izuku arched his back slowly and managed some upper body basic stretches that took a surprising amount of the pain from his back muscles and spine. He doubted he'd get anything better until the painkillers got into full swing, so he steeled himself again and hauled himself to his feet. Gingerly, Izuku hobbled to the bedroom door, keeping one hand on the wall all the way to the kitchen in case his knee pain flared up and buckled under him. Shudo stood with his back to Izuku, flipping a pancake over the stove and adding it to an already large stack of the food. Izuku limped over and, slowly, so he wouldn't startle his husband, wrapped his arms around Shudo's waist. He melted into the warm left side tiredly, and was surprised at how warm the right half of Shudo's body was from the sun. "Good morning, Izuku," Shudo said, the sound humming through Izuku's body as well, calm and safe and stable. Izuku hummed wordlessly back, though it was at least halfway a grunt. "Hungry?" Shudo asked, not realizing just how much Izuku was enjoying feeling the vibrations of his voice through Shudo's back. Not to mention the warmth. And how gosh darn comfortable Shudo's shoulders were and had no right to be. Before Izuku could grunt again, his stomach answered for him, reminding them that Izuku hadn't eaten real food in 3 days. Shudo laughed, and Izuku knew that if he melted into the hug anymore, they would fuse together. He wasn't necessarily complaining, but he didn't have the energy to ask permission, so he would resist. "Why don't you sit down and I'll get everything set out?" Shudo said as he finished the last pancake. Izuku groaned, not budging from his place. The pain had reduced greatly now that he had been stationary long enough and was on a human heating pad, and he was very opposed to changing that. "Comfy?" Shudo asked. You can't eat from there." Izuku opened his mouth like a baby bird to prove that comment wrong, and Shudo laughed again. Izuku pried open his eyes and watched Shudo smile. It was so much more common for Shudo to smile now, especially at home, but Izuku still drank it up every time he saw it. Izuku buried his face in Shudo's neck and kissed the skin there a few times as he breathed in the smell of his husband and home. Shudo leaned into the touch and wrapped his arms around himself to hold Izuku in return. "How are you feeling?" Shudo asked. Back to that numbers." Izuku shifted so he could reply to that. 0 for dreams, 6 for pain right now, but this morning was a whole 8, and, Izuku sighed theatrically, a 10 because I'm so exhausted you should come to bed and cuddle me. After you eat. How about at the same time? Oh, Shudo looked down at where Izuku had rested his chin on his shoulder and smiled slyly. 2 at once? Izuku snorted and buried his face in Shudo's neck as both of them snickered dumbly at the joke. Izuku kissed Shudo's neck and nibbled at the skin, pulling a delighted sigh from Shudo's lips. "I miss the time in our relationship when I thought you didn't know what you were doing. I used to think you were the innocent one, but you know exactly what you're doing." Izuku giggled. "Yeah, I do." "And we both know you're too sore to do it," Shudo mused. Izuku sighed. "Yeah, I am." A grin tugged at his lips. "But I can still mess with you." Izuku kissed Shudo again, skin on the skin above his wonderfully comfortable traps, and Shudo audibly bit back and, "You're lucky you're hurt or you'd be in for it," Shudo said, struggling to sound upset. "I'd have it no other way," Izuku purred, giving Shudo a joking smirk. Izuku opened his mouth to finally agree to eat first, but a flash of light out the window caught his eye. Izuku perked up from where he'd rested his head and stared out the window at the fence around their backyard. A few figures were gathered there, and it took Izuku's sleepy brain a moment to realize what it was. "What the F dash?" Izuku cried. There were at least 3 cameras pointing directly at them from the fence line, and several other members of the paparazzi with them. "How did they find us?" Shudo said, frowning slightly before his face returned to the stoic expression he used with the media. And if that didn't boil Izuku's blood. Izuku lunged forward and tugged the blinds shut over the kitchen window. He didn't even notice his pain flaring as he hurried to the glass doors in the living room and locked them, turning on the automatic tint and shutting every curtain and blind as he went. He and Shudo never got time together to just relax and be together with how busy hero work kept them, no matter how hard they tried to make time. Then Izuku had messed up their time together by working from home and then getting hurt. And now when he was finally just wanting to rest and be happy with Shudo, those vultures were messing it up. They made Shudo stop smiling. They made Shudo cold again, and today was supposed to be a day where Izuku got to see Shudo be warm and smile, and then it was just gone. In a second they took it all away. "I don't know," Izuku said, a frantic tone edging into his voice to match the frantic feeling racing his heart. "They shouldn't have been able to. We didn't get tailed from the hospital, and we didn't get spied on all last night, so how, they can't, we have to get out of here." "It's going to be fine, Izuku. It's just really annoying in the meantime." "I'll call Emi and see what we should do," Shudo said. Izuku nodded and tried to regain some semblance of calm. "We need to pack. We need I'm not wearing a shirt." They saw. Izuku wanted to rip his hair out thinking about the pictures they must have gotten of his ugly scar-ridden flesh. "We need to get out of here," Izuku almost sobbed. He hurried to their bedroom with Shudo at his heels preparing to call their secretary. Izuku was breathing hard, even though he'd walked much farther than from the living room to the bedroom before without breaking a sweat. He was feverish now. He fought villains every day in life-and-death altercations, and yet only now was he shaking with his heart pounding in his ears. This was all so backwards. It was so wrong. Izuku ripped the suitcases out of the closet and flung them on the bed, using the same technique on the dresser's contents and shoving whatever clothes he grabbed first into each bag. They were wasting time. The paparazzi would climb the fence and ruin everything else, and Izuku still wasn't wearing a shirt. He was still tired, and his quick movements made his body ache with fresh pain that wasn't making his hands shake any less. He was shaking. The symbol of hope was shaking because of a bunch of cameras seeing his stupid old scars. How pathetic. He'd shown everyone in the span of 4 days that he was dangerous and pathetic, and the paparazzi still wanted to barge into his life to rub it in. Izuku deserved it, he knew. He could have done so much more. People were out there in trouble, and Izuku was here fighting back tears like some toddler having a tantrum over not getting to be lazy for even longer. Over not getting to ignore his responsibilities. Over not getting to break his promise. He'd promised, and already he was failing again and again. Okay. Izuku, stop, Izuku. Shudo grabbed Izuku's shoulders and faced him. Izuku, you have to calm down. I know you're upset and this is not helping the recovery process, but getting this panicked won't help either. Shudo, they know where we live. They saw us having that private moment because they found our home. We just got this place. We just finished moving in and now we have to leave even though we spent so much time with him here. How can you not care? Of course I care, Shudo said, brow furrowing, and while Izuku knew it was out of concern, his heart beat faster at how angry it looked. Izuku, of course I care, Shudo said again, softening his expression as he noticed Izuku's distress, but we have to keep our heads right now. Izuku nodded, taking a couple of breaths as the frantic cloud in his head began to clear. Izuku felt his shoulders lose a degree of tension as the sunlight soaked into and warmed his skin. They both noticed at the same time, both turning to stare at the slightly larger group of paparazzi at their fence, filming the moment through the glass doors that took up one wall of the bedroom. Crap! Izuku half-sobbed. He shot a tendril of black whip to pull down the blind and leapt over the bed to secure it. Crap. Crap, 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 crap. Izuku muttered as his frenzied movements restarted. His spine felt like it was being bored through with nails and he could barely breathe with the scars tightening over his chest. F-. Why didn't I? Izuku, stop it. Shudo's voice cut to Izuku's core and he froze mid-step. Shudo. No. Shudo cut Izuku off. This is serious, Izuku. You're scaring me right now and you need to stop and think and take an actual normal-length breath before we do anything else. Izuku trembled, though his feet felt rooted in place, and a million emotions raced through his head like a whirlwind. Filled his eyes very suddenly and all at once. I'm sorry. Shudo, I'm so sorry. Izuku covered his face with his hands, pressing his fingers into his eyes as if it would stop the tears. Shudo wrapped his arms around Izuku and Izuku sobbed hopelessly into Shudo's chest. I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm so sorry, Izuku repeated like a mantra, because it was all he could figure out how to say. He didn't know what was wrong with him. He didn't know why he couldn't think straight, or why his hands shook, or why he was struggling to breathe for such a tiny little reason. How could he say anything but apologies if he didn't even know what had made him act like that? It's all right, Izuku. It's all right, I'm not mad. I'm just worried about you, love. Shudo pressed a kiss into Izuku's hair. This isn't like you. I'm sorry. Izuku croaked. Shudo hushed him gently and held him tighter. Don't say anything else right now, okay? Let's figure out what to do and then we can talk about this more. I'm gonna pack our bags, and you call Emmy and tell her that the fugly vultures found us and we need a place to stay for a few nights until we can get this all sorted out. Does that sound okay? Shudo asked. Izuku nodded, grateful that Shudo would be taking the task that required the most decision-making. Izuku also let out a strangled laugh at Shudo's description of the situation. That was enough to get a smile from his husband, and that honestly did a lot more for Izuku's health than anything else so far. Izuku grabbed his phone and sat tensely on the edge of the bed, sniffling as he dialed. The phone rang only once before Emmy answered. What's wrong? She asked, not unkindly, yet Izuku felt a miserable pang. He really was just a burden if her first thought was that he was messing up again. And she was right to. The press found our house, Izuku said, hoping he'd gotten his voice to sound less like he'd just been bawling his eyes out. We need a place to stay for a while until we can find a new house or something. I don't know. Sheet. Those guys just aren't quitting lately, Emmy muttered. Okay, well, I've got a few places lined up for this kind of a situation. I just have to make a few calls. You get packed and I'll send a car to take you to whichever hotel has the best open bar. I don't drink, Izuku reminded her. You sound like you need to, Emmy replied, pulling a small chuckle out of Izuku. Now give me a few minutes to make the calls. I'll send a few of your sidekicks to help you guys lose any tails you get. Bye, Emmy. Izuku knew his sign-off was pitiful at best and depressing at worst, but he didn't think anything more joyful existed in his body right now. What did she say? Shudo asked, rolling up a pair of pants to fit in the suitcase. She'll send a car and call us back when she gets the hotel location. And she'll have our team help us lose any tails this time so they don't follow us there. Even if they did, hotels that house heroes like this are very good at keeping the press from bothering their guests. We'll be okay. Shudo zipped up Izuku's suitcase and moved on to his own. Izuku sighed quietly. His body was back to yelling at him again, so he was simultaneously feeling bad for not helping more and feeling too much pain to want to do anything. Numbers? Shudo prompted. Izuku blinked back warm tears as they pricked his eyes. Still 0, 7 and going on 8 for pain and then 9. Shudo handed Izuku a hoodie off the end of their bed and Izuku gratefully pulled it on to reduce the pain that came with being exposed to the chilly air. Izuku helped Shudo pack for the next few minutes, just handing him whatever items were out of Shudo's immediate reach. Izuku wasn't sure how much time passed after they packed their last bag of Shudo just rubbing his warm hand over Izuku's back as they sat on the bed, before they heard the doorbell chime. Both of them jumped up, though Izuku's jump was more stiff than Shudo's. Izuku reached for one of the bags, but Shudo held out a hand to stop him. I've got the bags, Izuku. You go get the door. Izuku wanted to argue, but his throbbing muscles and bones and tendons and, well, everything convinced him to just agree. Izuku walked as quickly as his achy body would allow and peeked out the front door peephole. The car Emmy sent was parked as close to the front door as possible and the driver stood in front of the door waiting for them to answer. Past that, Izuku could see a couple of his sidekicks keeping the paparazzi out of the way. It was comforting to know that once Izuku and Shudo opened the door, they wouldn't be bombarded with pictures and yelling. Shudo joined him a moment later, 2 suitcases and a duffel bag, all their necessities for the next few days, and Shudo's paperwork, slung over his shoulders. Izuku hated making him carry everything. Hey, Shudo said, noticing the miserable look on Izuku's face, I'm happy you're letting me take care of you by doing this. I like being the heavy lifter in our relationship every once in a while. Are you sure? Izuku asked, hating the quiver in his voice. He was the #1 hero, for goodness sake. Completely. Now let's not leave them to deal with the vultures any longer. Izuku pulled open the door and immediately heard the clamor of the media at the edge of their lawn. Izuku locked the door, and the driver quickly ushered them into the waiting car, none of them waiting the time it would take to put their luggage in the trunk since the back seat was plenty big. Izuku tried not to pay attention to the paparazzi outside the sound-treated car, and while he knew the tinted windows hid him from their view, he still felt exposed and ogled like some kind of animal in a cage. Izuku and Shudo didn't speak during the car ride, letting the driver take as many turns as were necessary to escape the media. Shudo kept his warm hand moving to different areas on Izuku's back, gently massaging the usual achy spots with that hand while his cold hand rested on Izuku's thigh. Away from the pressing feeling of eyes on his back and further lulled by the steady hum of the car and his husband's heartbeat, Izuku found his eyelids getting heavier. Shudo pressed a kiss into the top of Izuku's head and Izuku let himself go limp in his husband's arms. A breath that was half sigh, half whimper escaped Izuku's lips and Shudo held him tighter. Izuku had just begun to drift off when the car came to a stop. Izuku reluctantly lifted his head off of Shudo's warm chest and glanced out the window. They were in a parking garage, and a set of quite nice elevator doors stood against one wall with the flourishy logo of a hotel stamped on their front. Izuku recognized it as one of the nicest hotels in the city and inwardly felt guilty for spending so much. He knew they could afford it, but growing up poor kind of sticks with you. Shudo shifted slightly and allowed Izuku to take his time sitting up, which Izuku was exceedingly grateful for since staying still had caused his joints to stiffen up painfully again. Once he was sure Izuku was upright, Shudo slid out of the car, helping Izuku out gently, then guiding him to the elevator where their driver was already waiting with their luggage. It struck Izuku as odd that he hadn't even noticed someone taking the luggage from right beside him when they'd arrived here, but with how much the pain was making his head spin, and with how exhausted he still was from the previous few days, Izuku was content to worry about his slacking situational awareness later. For now, he was happy to nuzzle into Shudo's warm neck and doze on the elevator ride up. The elevator pinged softly, but jolted Izuku nonetheless. He vaguely remembered being led down a short hallway suspiciously void of doors for a hotel, at the end of which was apparently his room. Izuku didn't pay attention to the dark room as Shudo tugged him along. He didn't even realize he had fallen into the bed before he was fast asleep. When Izuku next awoke, he was in a strange bed, in a strange room, in his pajamas, and absolutely desperate to taste whatever was making that heavenly smell. Izuku went through the tiring process of dragging himself out of the bed, even as his head spun from pain and hunger. His sleep-addled brain took the time he spent hobbling toward the smell to gather his memories of what brought him here. He wasn't exactly happy, but at least they were now in a hotel where no one could find them or bother them or ruin Izuku's chance to eat the pancakes Shudo was cooking again. Where I get dich cooking of stuff? Izuku slurred groggily. Shudo turned and smiled at him. I've had plenty of time to get room service to bring it up while you were napping. It's a little afternoon now and you still haven't eaten. I'd have gotten pre-made food, but I know you were wanting pancakes, and they didn't make that. As Shudo filled him in, he guided Izuku to sit at the round dining table the hotel provided, then placed a tall stack of pancakes in front of Izuku. Is that why I feel worse than before I fell asleep? Izuku said wryly, his smile not reaching his eyes. Shudo hummed and placed his warm hand on the especially tender spot on Izuku's spine. Izuku sighed at the small relief. Once Izuku had finished eating, Shudo helped him over to the very comfortable couch in front of large windows that were tinted and mostly covered by dark blinds. From what Izuku could see of the outside world, they were likely on or near the top floor of the hotel, which meant no other buildings were even close to tall enough to see in their windows, which meant no paparazzi. With that comforting thought, Izuku cuddled up into Shudo's left side, feeling the subtle temperature increase Shudo made seep into his sore body. Izuku was already feeling better as the food hit his stomach, and he knew the heat would help his pain die down fairly soon. His painkillers were working, hence his pain scale being at about a 5, but he still would like to get it to a 3 before he was happy. Anything you want to watch? Shudo asked. Izuku was just happy to listen to Shudo's heartbeat and feel the vibration of his low voice every time he spoke, personally. That can be arranged, Shudo said, and Izuku blushed, realizing that he'd muttered the last part. What would you like me to talk about? Izuku thought for barely a moment. The wedding, he said. When he and Shudo had gotten married, it had been a rushed thing. Izuku had almost died, Shudo had proposed as soon as Izuku was back at work, and they had kept it from the public as long as possible so they could have a proper ceremony. Unfortunately, only a few weeks later, one of the companies they were working with for the decor leaked the information, and Izuku and Shudo decided to just sign the papers. Izuku's mom was there, along with Shudo's mother and siblings, and a few of their Hell classmates that had been able to discreetly attend, so Izuku was happy. And, of course, All Might was there, so… Nope, Izuku thought, not thinking about that right now. Despite how emotional and wonderful the tiny get-together was, it was hardly a wedding. Izuku was more than happy to have been married with those people there, but he wished he was able to experience a real wedding with the love of his life. For goodness sake, they had done it in their gym clothes because they were so worried about getting mobbed by paparazzi. Izuku had been deprived of getting to see Shudo in a wedding suit. Ever since their marriage, Izuku and Shudo had toyed with the idea of having a ceremony anyway. They would certainly have the funds to do it for their own enjoyment, even if it would basically just be a glorified vow renewal barely a year after the marriage. The only issue was trying to get all their family and friends in one place for the event without getting swarmed by the media. It would be Izuku's actual nightmare to have their wedding crashed like that. I found a new flower arrangement company. Mike-sensei recommended them since they're the ones that did the flowers for he and Aizawa-sensei's wedding. Maybe this time we won't have to elope, Izuku snorted. I'm sure the old catering service will still be on board since they do these hero events under the radar all the time. We'd obviously have katsudon and cold soba, and a red velvet and vanilla cake with green icing too. Symbolize all the kids we're gonna have and dash. Show! Izuku laughed, playfully smacking Shudo's leg as they both laughed. I was tempted to suggest we require people to wear all the bad luck tokens they own, but I feel we get in enough trouble already and really shouldn't tempt fate. I think that's for the best, Izuku sighed. After a beat, Shudo resumed talking. I want there to be rindu in the flower arrangements, but I also would like some chrysanthemums and lotus flowers. I think a lighter pink or blue color scheme would work best to incorporate both. The kimono I have from our last attempt has embroidery of lotus and cherry blossoms, so I'd like them to match. Fuyumi suggested we have candles lighting the aisle, but I worry the flowers may make that become hazardous if we have a bouquet on the side of each aisle seat like you liked. She also suggested some form of ice sculpture. I thought of swans, but I don't think that's what she meant. You could make little ice streamers to drape over the aisle? Izuku suggested, and we can have the bouquets on every other aisle seat and candles between those to reflect off of the ice. Shudo smiled. That sounds perfect. Shudo mumbled on and Izuku curled his fingers into Shudo's dark t-shirt, his eyes drooping contentedly. Izuku. Izuku's eyes remained closed. I know we haven't exactly picked a location yet, but... Shudo trailed off and that woke Izuku up quickly. What? Izuku asked, shifting enough to see Shudo's slightly worried expression. Why are we acting like this is impossible? What do you mean? Izuku asked. Why can't we really have the wedding? Izuku was wide awake now. He sat up and looked at Shudo, searching for any hint that he was kidding, but there was none. Shudo, you know why? Today just further proves that, so let's just talk about something else. No, Izuku, I don't know why. So what if the paparazzi find out? We'll have a crowd of pros and police in attendance so we have plenty of resources to make sure it's private, plus there are plenty of locations like this that cater to privacy. We're already married, why do we need dash? You can't tell me you don't want this too. Izuku, with how much we've been through, don't we deserve this? Yes, a tiny voice cried inside him. But Izuku shook his head. It wasn't right. He couldn't waste time on frivolities like a meaningless ceremony that wouldn't even be possible. Meaningless? Shudo suddenly asked, startling Izuku from his thoughts. He'd said that out loud? And oh no, Shudo looked upset. He looked hurt. Izuku had hurt him. I'm sorry, Shudo. Of course it's not meaningless, it's just, there's no real reason to waste time worrying over something that isn't even likely to work out. I mean, not that we won't work out, I mean a ceremony wouldn't work out. But I think it would, Shudo insisted, with his expression stubborn and still with that glimmer of hurt behind his eyes. Okay, Izuku huffed frustratedly, pushing himself up to allow himself to pace the area in front of the couch while Shudo watched on. So if it did, then what would be the point of it? I mean, we'd have to take off work for at least a few days to prepare, and if we want everyone to come, half of Japan would be hero-less for a weekend, and we can't expect everyone to be willing for that to happen. I mean, if you think about it, it would just be selfish of us and then we'd cancel and everyone would have wasted time and money making plans and it just isn't worth how much trouble dash. I think it is worth it, Shudo said, rising to interrupt his pacing. We're worth it. Isn't that enough? Not. Will the civilians we're abandoning think it's enough? Izuku finally settled for, will the villains? Shudo crossed his arms. What? So if our class is out of the picture for 3 days, maximum, that means none of the other heroes are at all capable of picking up the slack. You forget how long others were active before our graduation. If there's an attack, Izuku fretted, and someone's in danger, or if a villain finds out because of the press and takes the opportunity to make a move, what if there's a new league of villains? What if All for One comes back dash? That's bullshit and you know it, Shudo said, his voice cold and hard as ice. I won't be there to stop them. If I'm not there, then what? How can I? It's not happening. I won't let it. I won't fail. Izuku, it's not a failure to take time off. You have a life too, and one life can't hold up the world. But I can. A flash of light and the snap of a camera shutter and Izuku and Shudo whirled to face the open doorway and the single photographer capturing their image. Before Shudo or Izuku moved to react, there was a blur of yellow as one of Izuku's sidekicks, Soul Army, tackled the photographer to the ground. Just behind her was Marksman, Izuku's usual sidekick for night patrols. We're so sorry, Soul Army said, dragging the photographer out of the doorway. We have no idea how they found you. This one has apparently been staying in the hotel. He checked in at the same time that you got here. How is that possible? Izuku asked, his voice much harsher than he intended, but he was just glad it didn't crack. We don't know, Marksman said as he picked up the photographer's dropped camera and removed the memory chip. We know you didn't have any tails after the first few turns, so how they found out where you were means there may be someone on the inside. That's ridiculous, Soul Army said. The only people who knew were the heroes helping out, and we wouldn't spill that. What other possibility is there? Marksman scowled. Anything but that. Soul Army insisted. Can we discuss this once you've gotten the paparazzi out of here, please? Shudo asked monotonously. If Izuku hadn't known him so well, he wouldn't have seen the anxious energy hidden behind Shudo's emotionless facade. Oh. Soul Army chuckled guiltily and edged from the room as she muttered apologies. We'll look into a possible leak and update you soon, Marksman assured. Finally the door shut and left the two heroes alone. Izuku couldn't stand there any longer. He couldn't think anymore. Not when there may be someone who told the vultures where to find them. Not when he couldn't even talk to Shudo without FANG up. Izuku walked toward the hallway that led to the bedroom. Izuku. Izuku froze in place, even though Shudo hadn't used his ice. Shudo, please. I can't do this right now. Then when? Shudo was as close to yelling as he could get outside a battle. When you run head first into another battle and end up in the hospital, or bedridden for weeks because you can't take a break. When you get stabbed through the chest again and still decide to lift a building or something. Or when you actually die because you couldn't breathe under the weight of the world. I can't watch you do this to yourself or deal with the fallout like this. Why are you trying to be the pillar when we fought so hard to end that cycle? Why Izuku? Because I promised him. The words tore from Izuku's throat, and they swallowed every sound that followed, leaving him trembling in front of a silent Shudo. The tension stretched taut between them, and with their suite so high in the sky, they couldn't even hear the bustle of the city or the wildlife like at home. Izuku couldn't look at Shudo. His eyes stayed downcast and he willed the gathering tears to dry, but to no avail. A warm hand suddenly cupped his face, and Izuku startled despite himself, until Shudo's thumb gently brushed his tears away. You haven't broken your promise, Izuku. Izuku kept his eyes down, hiccuping and fighting his sobs down so he could just respond. Finally he drew in a big enough breath to stutter out, I told him IWW would be a great hero and I just want TT to help people like he did, but ever since HEL left, I've been messing everything up. How have you messed everything dash? You literally just listed all the ways, Izuku interrupted miserably. Oh, right, Shudo said, thoughtfully pausing. But that doesn't mean it's unfixable. Shudo took Izuku's hands and led him over to the couch again. He quickly grabbed his phone off the kitchen counter and returned to sit beside Izuku. Let's see what we can do about one thing at a time. Where should we start? Izuku sniffled and positioned himself so he was not quite touching Shudo. It wasn't fair to lean on him after how he'd been acting. Nonetheless, he was glad to have some guidance from Shudo for his scattered thoughts. I've been trying to stay offline since last night, but I've been worried that I freaked everyone out. Okay, let's start there, Shudo said calmly, pulling up the most popular hero news site to check the headlines. Izuku was center stage, unfortunately, but he was surprised to see that there was little in the way of insults toward him. In fact, there was a lot of talk of his skills in resisting the drag and complimenting his unconscious arrests. They went from there, scrolling through each social media account Shudo had, both as a hero and anonymously, and seeing how the discourse had progressed since last night. Izuku knew there had been some anger when he'd initially been ordered to take 2 weeks off for a death in the family, though the public still didn't know that meant All Might's death, but now it seemed the general consensus was that Izuku had more than earned a leave of absence. There were even some hero analysis forums that Izuku frequented, anonymously of course, that were celebrating his actions and theorizing how he managed it. It was baffling. You see? They don't fear you because they know you are so strong because you protect them. They care about you because they know you care about them, and so they trust you. All that's missing is that you trust them. Izuku nodded mutely, so Shudo continued, "What's next? What else is on your mind?" They sat there for some time. Izuku wasn't sure how long, but by the time they had addressed each of Izuku's worries, they were a tangled pile of limbs, and Izuku was shaking with laughter rather than tears. "I'm sorry, Shudo," Izuku said. "I wasn't thinking straight and I took out my emotions on you without finding a better process." "It's okay, Izuku. You're not yourself right now. I'm supposed to help you at times like this. Goodness knows you've helped me enough for it to be warranted." Izuku chuckled lightly and they fell into a much more comfortable silence. Izuku was beginning to consider another nap in his husband's ridiculously comfortable arms, but his brain had never stayed inactive for long. "Shudo!" Izuku cried, sitting up like he was struck by Kaminari's quirk. "What?" Shudo gasped, and he obviously hadn't had as much trouble drifting off based on how groggy his voice was. "When we were at the agency the night that van followed us home, remember how we were crowded in front of the elevator?" Yeah," Shudo rubbed his face. "Yeah, I do. Why?" "When we were getting to the car, this one person in the crowd grabbed my arm for a couple seconds. I didn't think much of it at the time, but what if it was a touch-activated quirk? I'm sure some kind of tracking quirk would be valuable in the media. Especially hero-centric media. I know it's a bit of a leap, but I've been trying to think of anyone on our team that would sell us out or be irresponsible enough to let our location slip, but I couldn't, and besides, that wouldn't explain how that van followed us home so easily even when we were taking countermeasures." "That's a really good idea. I'll tell Marksman and have him look into it," Shudo said, picking up his phone again and typing out a quick paragraph. As soon as he hit send, Izuku felt the spike of adrenaline rush out of his body, leaving him achy again. Izuku bit back as much of a whimper as he could and melted back into Shudo's side. He was already half asleep before either of them spoke again. "Hey Shudo!" Izuku murmured sleepily against Shudo's chest. "Yes." Shudo hummed. "I think I know where we should have the wedding." Izuku was grateful enough to not comment on the way Shudo's breath hitched before he said, "Where's that?" "Dagoba Beach. I want him to be there too." Izuku could almost hear the soft smile on Shudo's face. "That sounds perfect." Shudo took great care not to wake Izuku as he snuck out of their hotel room that night. Marksman had texted him as soon as they found a lead on Izuku's theory, and Shudo had quickly forwarded the information to Hitoshi. Since Izuku was dead asleep, Shudo figured he'd try to solve the last of Izuku's worries before morning, and who better to help than Class A's resident underground pro. Izuku needed a chance to rest at home, and Shudo wasn't going to let some greedy, selfish reporter take that away from them. Izuku squeezed the All Might plushie closer, likely thinking it was Shudo's arm, and he hummed lightly in his sleep. Shudo could not stop the slight blush that crept over his face at how adorable this man he'd married was. Even after years of being together and married, Shudo often felt like the little love-struck schoolboy he'd begun this adventure as. Shudo's phone vibrated in his hand and he pulled himself away from watching his sleeping husband. He had a job to do. "Hitoshi. LVL4 of parking garage. Meet you there. Coming now." Shudo reached the elevator and sent a quick message to the Hell class group chat as well, filling them in on his plan. He quickly had several volunteers to assist. Shudo reached the parking garage where Hitoshi was leaning against a sleek black car, fully dressed and carrying the case that held Shudo's work clothes as well. It was rare that Shudo did hero work at night. His quirk was just a bit too flashy for Twilight Patrol. Even One for All was adaptable for stealth or surveillance, but fire and ice were a bit of a giveaway. That's why it was so unusual for him to use this particular suit. Shudo pulled the vest and gear over his t-shirt and decided his black pants would work fine for his purposes. They both climbed into the car and Shudo pulled on his mask. He didn't need one, but he felt it would complete the ensemble. Kato Hina. Hitoshi began as they pulled out of the parking garage. Her quirk, radar, allows her to accurately map a certain area in her head and then track a single person at a time, as long as she has had skin-to-skin contact. Shudo frowned. How long does it last? Until she deactivates it. If she has a tracker on a person, her eyes glow red, but when she only has a map, her eyes glow green. Once she deactivates a tracker, she cannot recall it without reaching the activation requirements again. Thank you for agreeing to help so last minute, Shudo said, impressed by the amount of information Hitoshi had gotten just from the name and quirk marksman had found earlier. Dude, the number of times Izuku has saved my butt alone warrants me being able to drop everything for this. He acts like he's fine, but it's hard to lie to me when I've been in his head, Hitoshi replied. Shudo hummed. I assume you have an address to go with all that information? Shudo asked. Hitoshi chuckled and said, What, you think I'm just driving us around until we spot this beach? We're going to her office. I checked on the way here and she's working late. And she's alone. Good, Shudo said. Hitoshi glanced at him. What? He said, you're not, worried about this being legal or not? She heard Izuku, Shudo stated plainly. I'll rip her spine out before I worry if it's legal. A beat passed where all the sound Shudo heard was the whistle of wind outside their car and the hum of the engine. Finally, Hitoshi shrugged. Fair enough. What do I need to do once we get there? Shudo asked. They never turned out very good articles and always got the last report on major events until a couple months ago when they got a whole new camera crew and upgraded those studios. Coincidentally, that was about the same time they hired Kato as a reporter. A couple other heroes have restraining orders on her, but since she's a reporter, they don't do much. So she's going for bigger targets, Shudo seethed. Testing her limits. Then let's make sure the limits we place stick. The car finally slowed outside a short, modern-style office building with a large neon sign on the front, reading JCB. Only a couple lights were visibly on inside, most of the offices darkened and empty. The lobby lights were on, the only occupant being a custodian mopping the floor, and one office window was illuminated on the third floor, allowing Shudo to see the reporter they needed working inside. They drove into the alley around the side of the building, parking by a side entrance and climbing out of the vehicle. The side door was propped open, likely for easy access to the dumpsters in the alley, but it made Shudo and Hitoshi's job easier too. Slipping inside and locating the stairs without drawing the custodian's attention was easy, and with Hitoshi's keen observation skills helping them avoid the security cameras, Shudo could feel their plan coming together perfectly. Hitoshi turned the camera that was aimed at Kato Hina's door, then nodded to Shudo to move in. Shudo waited on the side of the door with hinges showing for Hitoshi to open the electrical panel in the wall and work his magic. Shudo really wasn't sure how technology worked, and he definitely hadn't understood what Hitoshi was talking about when they discussed the plan in the car, but he knew his role, so that was just fine. A couple seconds passed after Hitoshi finished working and slipped into the shadows, so even Shudo, who knew he was there, couldn't see him, before they got a reaction. Shudo heard a muffled voice in the office groan and swear, then a chair wheel squeaked and footsteps approached the door. Shudo pressed himself into the corner and waited for the door to swing open, hiding him from Kato's view as she left the office and made for the control panel Hitoshi had just been working on. These offices apparently have some really bottom-of-the-barrel internet connection, cuts out all the time to the point that all of the reporters know how to reboot the system, Hitoshi had said. It seemed that was indeed the case. Shudo waited for Kato to clear the doorway before he slipped into her office soundlessly. He rounded her desk, clicking the lamp off with one gloved hand as he sat down in the office chair and crossed one leg over the other to wait. The computer on the desk, which had been displaying an error message, pinged and rebooted. Only a moment after then Kato returned, none the wiser until she shut the door behind her and noticed the darkness of the room. Kato Hina, Shudo said simply, letting only bit of the malice in his heart slip into his voice. Kato froze where she was, eyes not as adjusted as Shudo's to the dark and that blindness adding to her anxious energy. You're afraid. Shudo continued, you're wondering who I am. You're wondering how I know your name. How I know that you live 2 streets down at the apartment building with the horse statue in the lobby. In suite you're getting more and more uncomfortable as I tell you I know you walk to work every morning at precisely 7 o'clock, and how I knew you'd be working late so I could speak to you. It's an invasion of privacy, I know. And it makes your skin crawl, doesn't it? Kato nodded, being able to see Shudo just enough, though he had a mask on so she couldn't yet recognize him. Now I want you to realize that very few people know you are here right now. What friends and associates you have will likely assume you are asleep at home for the first several hours of the morning. And virtually no one knows I am here. Shudo heard Kato breathe in sharply and her hand fumbled for the doorknob, but Shudo knew Hitoshi had blocked it in case she tried to run, so he wasn't worried. Don't worry, Shudo said, taking far too much pleasure in her increasingly frantic breathing. If I was going to hurt you, I would have made it much easier than this. I just want to explain something to you and I needed to make sure I got through to you clearly. Shudo stood and removed his mask, stepping into the dim light the window let in to allow Kato to see his face. Her eyes widened in surprise and fear that Shudo was glad to see. You violated my husband's privacy. You used your quirk non-consensually to track his location and you made the mistake of upsetting him during a very delicate time. I've noticed that restraining orders from your previous victims haven't had much effect on your tactics, so I'm handling this differently. Option 1. You deactivate your quirk right this second and keep the JCB out of mine and my husband's business forever, including deleting all files you have on us now, and tomorrow morning you will make sure to let all the other exporters you brought to our house know that your access to that location has expired and whatever else they need to hear to stay away from our home. Or, option 2, I put this mask back on and we see who believes you about how you got hurt, then I have my legal team, which, I assure you, is much better than yours, sue you and the JCB for all you're worth. Kato trembled with fear and didn't respond. Shudo stepped closer to the reporter and she pressed her back against the door, chest rising and falling rapidly. What's your choice? Kato's mouth flapped open and shut a few times and she seemed to be unable to form a response for a long moment as she stared into Shudo's unforgiving gray and blue eyes. I will. Delete the files, and stop my quirk. See? Her eyes, which had been glowing a soft red, intensified into a bright dot of color before fading to a plain black pupil. Shudo nodded in return. Good. I'd like to request that you avoid using that nice quirk of yours to harass other heroes down the line, but, Shudo laughed low and dark, I don't expect much from someone like you. Shudo stepped aside so she could reach her desk. Now the files. Why? On it. Kato hurried past him toward the desk and quickly sat down and began typing. Shudo rounded the desk again to look over her shoulder as she opened each file and dragged the images and half-written articles to the trash can, then cleared the trash can of the deleted files as well. Shudo nodded approvingly and walked toward the door, pulling his mask back over his face as he went. He paused with his hand on the doorknob and turned back to Kato. I assume you know that the nature, and even the existence of this conversation are to be kept between you and I, and not to be shared with anyone else, correct? Kato nodded stiffly. Then let our business be finished. For your sake. Shudo pulled the door open easily, not missing the way Kato gaped at him, then shut the door softly. Hitoshi leaned against one wall, arms crossed and expression mirthful. All finished. Hitoshi grinned. Shut up, Shudo said heatlessly, shoving past Hitoshi to get to the stairwell. They climbed back down and found the lobby was empty this time, the custodian having finished his work and departed for the night by then, and drove quickly back to the hotel. Thank you again for your help, Hitoshi. I don't know how you gathered so much intel on her so fast, but I really appreciate it. It's because she's annoying and you aren't the only heroes she's set off enough to call in an underground hero for surveillance. I just reached out to some of my local contacts. No big deal. Still, Shudo insisted, climbing out of the car, his discreet hero costume safely stored in the briefcase again. If you ever need my help with something outside of work, I owe you. I thought I already told you, dumbass. Hitoshi said and the engine revved. I'm doing this for Izuku, so consider this one of my debts to him getting paid. I hate keeping track of favors, so it's honestly preferable this way. Shudo smiled and waved goodbye as his former classmate and friend drove out of the parking garage. The elevator ride back to his and Izuku's floor was much calmer than his previous rides in this elevator today, a weight having been lifted off his shoulders. He was still tired since it was now past midnight after a very unhealthy and scattered sleep schedule for a couple days, but it wasn't a weighty feeling. It was freeing. Shudo didn't even hear the elevator ding, only realizing he'd arrived when the doors slid open and he saw his room door at the other end of the hall. Soul Army was on guard duty by the door, and tensed when she saw someone exit the elevator, but she quickly relaxed and then jumped TP confusion. "Wait," she said, pointing between Shudo and the door and herself like it was a tangled knot she could untie. "When did you dash?" "While you and Marksman were switching shifts. I waited till he left and you were on the way up and slipped out then," Shudo said, a little proud of how impressed she seemed by this. "Well, you're back now. You can head on in," she chuckled awkwardly and stepped aside for him. Shudo nodded gratefully and unlocked the door, opening and shutting it as quietly as he could so as to not wake Izuku. He was entirely successful, too, finding Izuku exactly where he'd left him, still curled up with the All Might plushie in his arms. Shudo carefully laid down behind his husband, wrapping his arms around Izuku's shoulders and pressing a kiss into his neck. Izuku sighed contentedly and Shudo smiled softly, quickly joining Izuku in sleep. Izuku had been expecting to be in a better mood when he woke up the next morning after that talk with Shudo, but he certainly wasn't expecting to wake up to a dozen missed messages and as good news as he did. "So I packed all our stuff so as soon as you woke up we could head home," Shudo said, smiling and making the dark circles under his eyes crinkle cutely. "Shudo." Izuku smiled and tried to figure out how that was possible, or at least how to nicely ask Shudo out loud, but he found himself missing the words. "I know it's a surprise," Shudo said, talking faster than usual. "And did Izuku smell coffee? But I had some of our friends reach out to the reporter who we figured out was tracking you. You were right about the contact tracking quirk, by the way, and she was persuaded to leave us alone under threat of legal action and only a bit of physical harm, but that doesn't matter because we can go home and cuddle all day just like you wanted. So get dressed and we'll meet Hikari downstairs at the car." Izuku definitely smelled an obscene amount of coffee. And he had never loved his husband more. "Sho." Izuku pecked a kiss on Shudo's cheek and smiled. "Was the physical violence threatening done by you and Hitoshi?" Shudo blinked in confusion. "How did you know that?" Shudo asked. Izuku laughed. "Because you texted in the class group chat, 'Who wants to help me murder a reporter tonight?' for making Izuku cry. Then Hitoshi told you to DM him, and I know both of you well enough to know that the reason you've had," Izuku sniffed the air again, "5 cups of coffee this morning is because you followed through. Just please tell me it's nothing you can get in legal trouble for?" "Yeah, Hitoshi and I made sure it wasn't traceable." Shudo paused and looked worried, asking, "Did you not want me to help? You were just so worried." "I didn't dash." "Shudo," Izuku interrupted, throwing his arms around Shudo's neck. "I am so FNG happy that you handled that beach, and I have no idea how you did it in one night, but what I do know is that I want to F the daylights out of you as soon as you take a nap." Shudo pouted jokingly at Izuku addendum, but they both smiled and shared a long kiss, only interrupted by the buzz of their phones as Hikari, another of Izuku's sidekicks, asked when they were coming down. Soon enough they were back at home. Shudo was fast asleep with his head pillowed on Izuku's lap. Izuku wasn't okay, and he certainly wouldn't be for a while yet, but for the first time since All Might died, he felt like everything was going to be just fine.